The tarmac shook before anyone heard the rotors. Then the sky over Seattle Memorial Hospital tore open
Hold still,
as
I'm
four
checking the
Black Hawk
straps.
helicopters descended in a combat
Good.
formation,
Shoulders feel tight?
usually
Confirm.
reserved for
All
war
set.
zones,
Good luck out there.
not civilian parking lots. Dust swirled in violent circles, blinding the terrified hospital security team, who rushed toward the landing zone with their hands raised, voices lost in the roar. They didn't stand a chance. A dozen Marines in full tactical gear hit the pavement before the wheels settled, boots synchronized like a drumbeat of war. Their weapons swept the perimeter with professional precision, ignoring the shouting chief of security, ignoring the gathering crowd of nurses and patients pressing against the glass windows. Their captain didn't ask for the hospital director. He didn't ask for a trauma surgeon. He marched straight through the automatic doors that slid open too slowly, and when they resisted, he simply kicked them aside. The crack of breaking hinges echoed through the emergency room like a gunshot. His voice carried over the chaos, amplified by the tactical throat microphone clipped to his vest. "We need Angel 6. Where the hell is Angel 6? The words hung in the sterile air of Seattle Memorial's emergency department like smoke from a distant fire. A name that meant nothing to the young residents, to the tired nurses, to the patients waiting in plastic chairs for answers to smaller emergencies. But somewhere in the back hallways, in the forgotten corners where the slow workers were sent to be invisible, someone heard that name and felt the past crash into the present like a helicopter falling from the sky. The linoleum floor of the emergency room at Seattle Memorial Hospital was a distinct shade of institutional gray, a color that Evangeline Hartwell knew more intimately than her own reflection. She knew it because she spent most of her 12-hour shift staring at it, her head down, her movements careful and deliberate, trying to make herself as small and unnoticeable as possible in a place that demanded speed and confidence. To the high-powered trauma surgeons who ran the department like generals commanding a battlefield, Eva was just the slow nurse. The 40-year-old woman with the pronounced limp in her left leg, the one who couldn't sprint when a code blue was called, who got winded climbing a single flight of stairs, who had to grip the handrails when she walked to steady herself against the pain that never quite went away. She was the one relegated to the grunt work, changing soiled bedding, updating patient charts that the residents were too busy to fill out, handling the non-critical cases, the drunks who wandered in on Friday nights, smelling of cheap whiskey and broken promises, the homeless seeking warmth on cold Seattle evenings, the elderly who just needed someone to listen. They didn't know why she limped, and frankly, none of them cared enough to ask. "Move it, Hartwell. You're blocking the hallway." Dr. Marcus Ashford's voice cut through her thoughts like a scalpel through skin, sharp, precise, designed to wound. He shouldered past her without slowing, his white coat pristine and starched, his movements fluid and confident. Ashford was the hospital's star trauma surgeon, the man whose face appeared in the hospital's marketing materials, whose name parents whispered when their children were wheeled into the emergency room with injuries that required miracles. Brilliant, handsome in that angular, clean-shaven way that looked good under television lights, and completely, utterly insufferable. Ava stumbled slightly as he brushed past, her left leg betraying her, as it always did when she was caught off guard. She gripped the edge of the nurse's station to steady herself, feeling the familiar throb of pain that lived somewhere deep in the bone, in the titanium pins and surgical scars that held her femur together, like a puzzle that didn't quite fit anymore. "Sorry, doctor," she murmured, her voice carrying that raspy quality that came from years of not using it, not fighting back, not demanding to be heard. "Don't be sorry. Be faster." Ashford threw the words over his shoulder without breaking stride, his expensive shoes clicking against the linoleum with the rhythm of a man who had never questioned his right to take up space. "We have a multi-vehicle collision coming in 10 minutes. Major trauma. If you can't keep up, go work in geriatrics. Or better yet, the morgue. They don't move fast down there." A few of the younger nurses giggled nervously behind the station. They idolized Ashford, hung on his every word during rounds, competed for his attention like students vying for the approval of a beloved teacher. To them, Eva was just part of the furniture, a slightly broken piece of equipment that the hospital administration hadn't gotten around to replacing yet. Eva adjusted her scrubs and went back to organizing the supply cart, checking inventory on gauze pads and alcohol swabs with the methodical attention of someone who had learned to find purpose in small tasks. She didn't let the insults sting anymore. She had developed calluses on her pride, the same way her hands had developed calluses from gripping crutches during the long months of physical therapy. She had been insulted by men far scarier than Marcus Ashford. She had been screamed at by drill sergeants in the pouring rain at officer candidate school. She had been cursed out by wounded Marines in the dust and blood of places whose names still made her hands shake when she heard them on the news. Ashford's arrogance was the chirping of a cricket compared to the roar of mortar fire. But she kept that to herself. Here, in this hospital, she was just Eva, not Lieutenant Commander, not Flight Nurse Hartwell, and certainly not the call sign she had buried deep in her personnel file 7 years ago, locked away behind redacted service records and medical discharge papers that cited permanent disability and psychological trauma. "Hey, Eva." Sarah Mitchell's voice was soft, apologetic, the voice of someone who still possessed basic human kindness in a place that often ground that quality down to nothing. She was a junior nurse, 28 years old, blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, still idealistic enough to believe that medicine was about helping people instead of protecting egos. Sarah hurried past with a tray of IV bags, offering Eva a sympathetic smile. "Ignore him. He's just stressed. The board says we have a VIP incoming with the crash victims, some senator's kid or something." "It's fine, Sarah." Eva's voice was steady, practiced in the art of pretending things didn't hurt. "I'm used to it." But her eyes betrayed her. While the other nurses saw chaos and noise, Eva saw patterns. She saw that the patient in bed 4 was going into early shock before the monitors started alarming. She saw that the intern fumbling with the intubation in bed 7 was about to puncture a lung if someone didn't stop him. She saw everything because she had been trained to see everything, to assess and triage and prioritize in the space between heartbeats. But she stayed silent. She had learned the hard way that in the civilian world, a limping nurse with a high school diploma equivalent and no current medical license wasn't supposed to diagnose. She was supposed to fetch blankets in empty bedpans and be grateful she had a job at all. The automatic doors slid open with their familiar pneumatic hiss, and the chaos escalated instantly. Paramedics rushed in, wheeling a gurney at a near run, their voices urgent and overlapping. "Male, 17, unrestrained driver, blunt force trauma to the chest." Trevor Dawson. That was the name the paramedics shouted as they burst through the doors. 17 years old, a whole life ahead of him, now hanging in the balance because of a moment of teenage invincibility. A friend's car, and a sharp turn taken too fast on rain-slick roads. Ashford was there instantly, materializing at the head of the gurney like he had been summoned. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, his voice calm and authoritative as he barked orders. "Get him to Bay 1. I want a chest x-ray and a full trauma panel, stat. Everyone else, stay out of the way. We need space to work." Eva stepped back against the wall, her hands clasped behind her back in a position that was more military parade rest than civilian deference. She watched Ashford work, watched his hands move across Trevor's chest, checking for injuries, assessing damage. He was good. She had to admit that. His technique was flawless, his knowledge encyclopedic. But he was arrogant. He was treating the trauma, not the patient. He was so focused on demonstrating his skill that he was missing something. From her position against the wall, Eva could see what Ashford couldn't, or wouldn't. Trevor's neck veins were distending, the jugular standing out against his pale skin like blue ropes under tension. His chest was rising unevenly, the right side barely moving while the left struggled to compensate. The monitor showed his blood pressure dropping steadily, but his heart rate wasn't spiking as high as it should for hypovolemic shock. Eva's mind whispered the diagnosis automatically, the same way a pianist's fingers find the right keys without conscious thought. Cardiac tamponade, or tension pneumothorax on the right side. The breath sounds will be absent. The trachea is deviating. She took a half step forward before she could stop herself. "Doctor," her voice was low but firm, cutting through the organized chaos of the trauma bay. "Check his right lung sounds. The trachea is deviating slightly to the left." The room went silent for a microsecond, that strange pause that happens when someone breaks an unspoken rule. Ashford spun around, his face flushed with adrenaline and something darker: rage, humiliation at being questioned in front of his team. "Excuse me?" His voice was ice wrapped around a blade. "Did I ask for a consultation from the peanut gallery? I am the attending physician here, Hartwell. I know what a collapsed lung looks like, and this isn't it." He stepped closer, invading her space, using his height and his authority like weapons. "Go get me 2 units of O negative from the blood bank, and shut up." Eva clamped her mouth shut, feeling the familiar burn of shame and frustration. She saw the intern, a young man named Davis who still had hope in his eyes, look at her with something like pity. They all thought she was overstepping, trying to play doctor when she should know her place. She turned and limped toward the blood bank, her left leg dragging slightly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The ghost of the pain flared up, a white-hot reminder of the night she had earned that limp. The night she had hung upside down in a burning fuselage over the deserts of Iraq, keeping a wounded Marine alive with one hand while using her belt to tourniquet her own shattered femur with the other. She retrieved the blood bags, checking the labels 3 times out of habit. When she returned to the trauma bay, the controlled chaos had escalated into something worse: panic. "BP is 60/40, Davis shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "We're losing him! Push epi! Get that blood hung!" Ashford's commands came rapid fire, but Eva could hear the edge of uncertainty creeping into his voice. He was starting to realize something was wrong, but his pride wouldn't let him backtrack. Eva handed off the blood bags, her eyes locked on Trevor's chest. It was worse now. The deviation was visible, even from across the room. If Ashford didn't decompress that chest in the next 60 seconds, Trevor Dawson would die. "He needs a needle decompression." Eva's voice was louder this time, more urgent. "Right second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, now." The room went absolutely silent. Ashford threw his stethoscope onto the instrument tray with a clatter that made everyone flinch. He walked up to Eva, close enough that she could smell the expensive cologne he wore, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Get out." His voice was a hiss, barely controlled fury. "Get out of my trauma bay. You are relieved of duty. Get out before I have security drag you out." Eva looked him in the eye. For a split second, the slow nurse vanished, and something steely and dangerous flickered in her gaze. Something that had stared down death in a dozen forms and refused to blink. But she blinked now, because this wasn't a battlefield. This was a hospital, and she was just a nurse with a limp and a past she couldn't talk about. "Yes, doctor." She turned and limped away, the sound of her uneven gait echoing under the urgent beeping of monitors. She walked toward the break room, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a frustration so profound it felt like grief. She knew Trevor was going to code. She knew Ashford wouldn't realize his mistake until it was too late. She was pouring herself a cup of stale coffee when the building shook. It wasn't an earthquake. Seattle got those sometimes, gentle reminders that the earth beneath the city was alive and restless. But this was different. This was a vibration that rattled the cheap mugs on the shelf, that made the fluorescent lights flicker and hum. a deep, rhythmic thumping that she felt in her bones before she heard it with her ears. Whop, whop, whop. Eva froze, her hand halfway to the coffee pot. She knew that sound. Every cell in her body knew that sound. It was encoded in her DNA, written into muscle memory that 7 years of forced retirement couldn't erase. Rotors, heavy lift, multiple aircraft. She moved to the window of the break room, which overlooked the employee parking lot. Her eyes widened. Approaching from the south, flying low and fast over the Seattle skyline, were 4 black shapes cutting through the night sky like predatory birds. Not the red and white of civilian medevac choppers. These were matte black with olive drab accents, running with minimal lights, their profiles unmistakable to anyone who had ever worked military operations. UH-60 Blackhawks, the workhorses of the United States military, and they were heading directly for the hospital. The PA system crackled to life, the voice of the night receptionist trembling with fear. Security to the main entrance. We have unauthorized aircraft landing in the parking lot. Repeat, unauthorized landing. This is not a drill. In the emergency room, the panic shifted instantly. Patients and nurses alike crowded against the windows, pressing their faces to the glass to see what was happening. The crash victims were momentarily forgotten as a new crisis unfolded. "Is it a terrorist attack?" someone screamed. "No," Ashford shouted, trying to regain control of his domain. "It's probably just a military drill gone wrong. Ignore it. Focus on the patients." But it was impossible to ignore. The roar was deafening now, a physical force that rattled teeth and made hearts race with primal fear. Eva watched from the break room, her coffee forgotten. She pressed her hand against the glass, her breath fogging the window. The lead helicopter flared aggressively over the rows of parked cars. The rotor wash so powerful, it sent a small sedan skidding sideways across the wet pavement. The landing skids touched down with barely a pause before the side doors flew open. They didn't wait for the rotors to slow. They never did. Men poured out, and Eva counted them instinctively, automatically. 12. Full kit. Plate carriers loaded with magazines. M4 carbines held in low-ready positions. Drop-leg holsters. Fast helmets with integrated communication systems. This wasn't a National Guard unit lost during a training exercise. This was a quick reaction force. Professional. Lethal. Purpose-built for one thing: recovering high-value targets in hostile environments. She squinted through the rain-streaked window, trying to make out details in the sodium vapor lighting of the parking lot. The patches on their shoulders were velcroed on, dark gray on black, deliberately low visibility. But she recognized the unit insignia even from this distance. A tactical dagger thrust through a globe. Force Reconnaissance, 1st Marine Division. "Oh God," Eva whispered, her hand falling from the glass. The 2nd and 3rd helicopters landed in a tight perimeter, their positions calculated to create overlapping fields of fire, blocking off the ambulance bay entirely. The 4th helicopter didn't land at all. It held a hover overhead, providing aerial overwatch, and Eva could see the silhouette of a sniper leaning out the open door, his rifle scanning for threats. This was a combat insertion in a civilian hospital parking lot in Seattle. The doors to the emergency room burst open with enough force to make the hinges scream. Frank, the elderly security guard who usually spent his shifts reading paperback westerns and drinking bad coffee, came running backward, his hands raised, his face pale with terror. "I couldn't stop them," Frank yelled to no one in particular. "They have guns. They have—" He didn't finish the sentence because the double doors behind him were kicked open so hard that one of them cracked off its top hinge, hanging at an awkward angle like a broken wing. 3 Marines entered first, moving with the fluid precision of water flowing downhill. They swept the room with their rifles, not aiming at the civilians, but not exactly pointing them away either. Their presence was overwhelming, transforming the sterile medical environment into something from a war zone. Everybody stay exactly where you are. The lead Marine's voice was amplified by the tactical throat mic clipped to his vest, booming through the small speaker attached to his chest rig. Hands visible, no sudden movements. We are not here to harm anyone. Dr. Ashford stepped out from Trauma Bay 1, his surgical gloves still covered in Trevor Dawson's blood. His arrogance, usually his armor against the world, was now a liability. He marched toward the armed men with the confidence of someone who had never truly faced consequences. "Who do you think you are?" Ashford demanded, his voice shaking slightly, but still loud. "This is a hospital. You can't just barge in here with weapons. I have a patient dying in there." The lead Marine didn't even blink. He was a giant of a man, easily 6'4", with shoulders that looked like they were carved from granite. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, giving him a permanent expression of skeptical intensity. He simply stepped forward and placed one hand against Ashford's chest, shoving him backward with casual, effortless force. Ashford stumbled back 5 feet, gasping, his pristine confidence shattered like the door behind him. "I am Captain Silas Thorne, United States Marine Corps." The giant's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "And I am not here for your patient, doctor. I am here for my soldier." "Your soldier?" Ashford sputtered, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. "We don't have any military patients admitted today. You have the wrong hospital." Captain Thorne ignored him completely. He reached up and keyed his radio with 2 quick taps. "Command, we have secured the lobby, scanning for the asset now." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his tactical vest and unfolded it with one hand, never taking his eyes off the room. He looked around, his gaze sweeping across the terrified faces of nurses, doctors, patients in wheelchairs, visitors frozen in place. "I am looking for a former service member," Thorne announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the emergency department. "We have intelligence that she is employed at this facility. We need her immediately. It is a matter of national security." The room was absolutely silent except for the persistent beeping of medical monitors and the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. "Who?" Ashford asked, some of his bravado returning now that he wasn't being physically manhandled. "Who are you looking for?" Thorne looked down at the paper, then back at the room. His expression was unreadable, professional, but there was something else there too, something that looked almost like reverence. "Her name is Evangeline Hartwell, but in the Corps, she was known by her call sign, Angel 6. A collective gasp rippled through the room like a stone thrown into still water. Heads turned slowly, agonizingly, eyes shifting and searching. Whispers started, confused murmurs that grew louder. "Angel 6? Who's that? I've never heard of—" "Wait, Hartwell, you mean Eva?" The nurses at the station turned almost in unison, their gazes moving toward the back of the department, toward the break room where Eva spent most of her time trying to be invisible. Dr. Ashford's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked like the beginning of understanding, though he fought against it. "Hartwell?" He let out a breathless, incredulous laugh. "The janitor nurse? The woman who empties bedpans and can barely walk upstairs?" He looked at Thorne like the Marine had lost his mind. "You landed 4 helicopters for her?" Thorne's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He took one step toward Ashford, just one, and the air itself seemed to compress with barely restrained violence. "Watch your tone, civilian." Thorne's voice was subsonic now, a growl that came from somewhere deep in his chest. "You are speaking about a recipient of the Navy Cross. You are speaking about a woman who saved 17 lives under enemy fire while her own leg was shattered. You are speaking about a legend." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the linoleum floor. Eva stood in the doorway of the break room. She had heard everything, every word, every syllable of her past being dragged into her present like a corpse pulled from a grave. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, frantic and desperate. She hadn't heard that call sign in 7 years. Angel 6. The name that had defined her for a decade. The identity that had consumed her life. The burden that had nearly destroyed her. She smoothed the front of her scrubs with trembling hands. She took a deep breath. She didn't want this. She had spent 7 years hiding from this, building a small, quiet life where the biggest trauma was dealing with Ashford's insults and the constant ache in her leg. But she knew that look on Captain Thorne's face. She knew that stance, that barely controlled urgency. She had seen it 100 times before, in a dozen different countries, in situations that always ended with someone bleeding or dying or both. They weren't here for a reunion. Someone was in trouble. Bad trouble. Eva pushed the door open. The squeak of the hinges sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I'm here." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It had that quality that all good combat leaders developed, the ability to be heard without shouting, to command attention without demanding it. Every head turned. Dr. Ashford looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. The young intern Davis looked from the Marines to Eva and back again, his mouth hanging open. Sarah Mitchell's hands were pressed against her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Captain Thorne turned. When he saw her, the hard lines of his face softened for just a fraction of a second. He saw the gray streaks in her hair that hadn't been there when she served. He saw the tired lines around her eyes, the weight of years spent trying to forget. He saw the way she leaned slightly on her left leg, favoring it even while standing still. But he didn't see a broken nurse. He didn't see someone to be pitied or dismissed. He snapped to attention, his boots slamming together with a crack that made the triage nurse jump. He brought his hand up in a crisp, sharp salute that belonged on a parade ground, not in a civilian hospital. "Ma'am." Thorne's voice was respectful, formal, but laced with urgency. "Captain Silas Thorne, 1st Force Reconnaissance Company, we require your assistance. We have a catastrophic situation in the field." Eva's world narrowed to a tunnel. The hospital faded. The staring faces disappeared. There was only Thorne, only his words, only the implications of what he was about to say. "The flight surgeon is down," Thorne continued, lowering his hand but maintaining eye contact. "We have a mass casualty event involving a covert unit 30 miles north of here. They are trapped in a box canyon. We can't get a medevac in safely, but we can get a bird to hover." He paused, and Eva saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. "We need a flight nurse who is combat certified for high-angle rescue operations. We checked the database, ma'am. You are the only one in the tri-state area with the rating and the experience." Eva stared at him. Her mind was racing, calculating, remembering things she had tried so hard to forget. High-angle rescue meant rappelling from a helicopter in hostile conditions. It meant working while suspended 50 feet in the air with bullets flying. It meant everything she had walked away from. "Captain, I haven't flown in 7 years." Her voice was steady, but inside she was screaming. "My leg." "We don't need your legs, ma'am." Thorne's voice was intense, almost desperate. "We need your hands, and we need your brain. There are 7 Marines bleeding out on that mountain right now." 7 Marines. 7 lives. The number hit her like a physical blow. "One of them is the general's son," Thorne added. "But that's not why we're here. We're here because the trapped unit specifically requested you. They radioed that they wouldn't let anyone touch them except Angel 6. Eva's breath caught in her throat. "Requested me? By name?" Thorne shook his head slightly. "Not by name, ma'am. The pinned-down unit, they're refusing medical aid. They keep saying the same thing over the radio." He paused. "We need Angel 6. Only Angel 6 can save the commander." The world tilted. Eva's vision blurred for a second, and she had to lock her knees to keep from swaying. The commander, she whispered. Are you talking about David Garrett? Thorne nodded grimly. Yes, ma'am, Commander David Garrett. And according to our medic on site, he's critical. Gunshot wound to the abdomen, shrapnel to the neck. He's asking for you. Eva closed her eyes. David Garrett, the man who had saved her life, the man who had carried her out of a burning helicopter while his own back was broken, the man who had visited her in the hospital every single day during her 6-month recovery, who had held her hand when the doctors told her she would never fly again, who had refused to accept her resignation letter 3 times before she finally forced him to take it. David, who had apparently kept her gear for 7 years, waiting for a day like this. The slow nurse, the invisible woman, the broken soldier, all of those personas fell away like a snake shedding dead skin. Eva opened her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was different. Not the raspy, apologetic murmur of Nurse Hartwell. This was the voice of Lieutenant Commander Evangeline Hartwell, the voice that had called in close air support under fire, that had coordinated mass casualty evacuations in the middle of ambushes, that had never, ever wavered when lives were on the line. My tactical gear is at my apartment. We have a full trauma kit on the bird, ma'am, Thorne said immediately. Everything you need. We leave in 2 minutes. Eva nodded once, sharp, decisive. She took a step forward, her limp pronounced but her movement purposeful. She was done hiding, done apologizing for taking up space. Hartwell! Ashford's voice cut through the moment like a rusty saw. He had found his courage again, or at least his arrogance. He stepped forward, his face red, his hands clenched into fists. You cannot leave. You are on shift. If you walk out those doors, you are fired. Do you hear me? Fired. Eva stopped. She turned slowly to face Dr. Marcus Ashford, the man who had made her life small and miserable for 2 years, the man who had dismissed her diagnoses and mocked her limitations and treated her like she was less than human. She walked up to him, closing the distance until they were face to face. She was shorter than him by 4 inches, but somehow in that moment, she seemed to tower over him. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and pulled out her hospital ID badge, the plastic card that gave her access to supply closets and break rooms, and nothing more. She looked at it for a moment, then dropped it into the front pocket of Ashford's pristine white coat. Dr. Ashford. Her voice was cool, calm, and absolutely commanding. That boy in Trauma Bay 1 has a tension pneumothorax, right side. You need to perform a needle decompression in the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. You need to do it in the next 90 seconds, or Trevor Dawson will die. And you will have to explain to his parents why you were too arrogant to listen to a nurse. She paused, letting that sink in. As for firing me? Eva smiled, but there was no warmth in it, no humor. It was the smile of someone who had stared down death and found it wanting. I resign, effective immediately. She turned to Captain Thorne. Let's go. The Marines parted like an honor guard as Eva walked through them. Her limp was obvious, her gait uneven, but she moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Sarah Mitchell ran up as Eva reached the doors. Eva, be careful, Sarah whispered, hugging her quickly. Take care of these people, Sarah, Eva said quietly. They need someone with a spine. Then she was through the doors, into the cold Seattle night, the rotor wash from the Blackhawks whipping her hair around her face. The Marines fell into formation around her, escorting her across the parking lot like she was precious cargo, which Eva realized she was. She was the only person in 300 miles who could do what needed to be done. Captain Thorne helped her into the side door of the lead helicopter. The interior was familiar and foreign at the same time. The smell of JP-8 jet fuel hit her like a time machine, dragging her back through 7 years in an instant. A Marine handed her a headset, and she pulled it over her ears, the active noise cancellation dampening the roar to a manageable level. Thorne pointed to a duffel bag secured to the floor webbing near her feet. "We brought your old loadout, ma'am." Commander Garrett kept it. "Standard issue flight suit, boots, and your personal trauma kit. He said you'd be back someday." Eva looked at the bag. Her throat tightened. She unbuckled her seatbelt, a violation of safety protocol that Thorne didn't comment on, and began stripping off her hospital scrubs right there in the fuselage. The Marines didn't stare. To them, she wasn't a woman. She was a fellow operator, a piece of essential equipment, as vital to the mission as ammunition or medical supplies. She pulled on the flight suit. It was a little loose. She had lost muscle mass in 7 years of inactivity, but the familiar weight of the fabric felt like armor sliding into place. She laced up the tactical boots, wincing as she tightened the left one over the scar tissue that covered her ankle like a roadmap of pain. The ache flared sharp and bright, a reminder of why she had left. But she shoved it into a mental box, the same way she had learned to compartmentalize fear and doubt and the screaming voices of the dying. "Sit rep, Captain." Eva's voice over the comms was clipped, authoritative, all business. The transformation was complete. Nurse Hartwell was gone. Angel 6 had returned. Thorne nodded, appreciating the shift. He pulled a tablet from his vest and passed it to her, the screen showing a topographical map of the Cascade Mountain Range north of Seattle. "Training exercise in the North Cascades went sideways," Thorne explained, his face grim in the red interior lighting. "First Recon Unit, high-altitude survival and evasion drill, but they stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see." "What kind of something?" Eva studied the map, her eyes scanning the terrain with the practiced eye of someone who had planned 100 missions. "We're still piecing it together. Initial intel suggested drug runners, but it's worse than that. What we know for certain is that the unit took fire from a well-organized, well-equipped hostile force. They called for extraction, and we sent in an Osprey." Thorne's jaw tightened, the muscles jumping beneath his skin. "The Osprey was shot down, crashed in a box canyon we call Devil's Throat. Terrain is too steep and unstable for us to land. We have to hover and winch you down." Eva looked up from the tablet, her finger tracing the contour lines that were stacked so close together they looked like a barcode. "Casualties? 7 confirmed on the ground, 3 critical, 2 serious, 2 ambulatory. Commander Garrett took a round to the abdomen and has shrapnel from the crash embedded in his neck. The corpsman is dead, killed in the initial attack. Garrett is the highest-ranking officer on site, but he's incapacitated. Right now, a lance corporal named Jake Whitmore is calling the shots." Thorne paused, and Eva saw something flicker across his face, concern mixed with political awareness. "Whitmore is General Robert Whitmore's son. The kid is green, barely 22. He's panicking, and he keeps screaming for Angel 6 because his father told him stories about you." Eva closed her eyes briefly. The general's son. That explained the 4 helicopters, the rapid response, the willingness to pull her out of retirement without warning. Politics always bled into military operations, turning simple rescues into high-stakes political theater. But David Garrett was there. David was bleeding out, and that was all that mattered. "How long until we're on station?" Eva asked, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. 6 minutes, the pilot's voice cut in over the comms, tight with tension. "But we have a problem. Weather front moving in from the north. Visibility is dropping fast, ceilings coming down. If we don't get you on the ground in the next 10 minutes, we scrub the mission." Eva looked out the small porthole window. The lush green suburbs of Seattle had given way to the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Cascade Mountains. Gray clouds swirled around the peaks like predators circling wounded prey, moving with unnatural speed. She felt the old fear clawing at her stomach, trying to find purchase. The last time she had been in a helicopter over hostile terrain, she hadn't walked away. She had been carried away on a stretcher, her legs shattered, her career over, her identity destroyed. The memory tried to surface, and Eva let it come, not fighting it, not pushing it away, just acknowledging it and setting it aside. She reached into the duffel bag and pulled out her personal medical kit. Intubation blades in protective sleeves, combat gauze impregnated with coagulants, chest seals in vacuum-sealed packages, morphine auto-injectors, surgical airways. The tools of her trade, unchanged in 7 years, still organized exactly the way she had left them. She rolled up the sleeve of her flight suit to check her watch, revealing the tattoo on her inner forearm. It was faded now, the black ink gone gray with age and sun exposure, but still legible. A pair of wings wrapped around the number 6, and below it, in flowing script that had once been crisp, Noli Timere. Fear not. Thorne saw it. He tapped his own chest, right over his heart, where his own unit insignia sat beneath his plate carrier. The boys on the ground think you're a myth, ma'am. The angel of Fallujah. Garrett kept your legend alive, told stories about you in every briefing, every training session. Half those Marines down there weren't even enlisted when you served, but they know your name. Legends don't stop bleeding, Captain, Eva muttered, checking the seal on a bag of saline, squeezing it to ensure there were no leaks. Tourniquets do. Pressure does. Quick decisions do. 2 minutes, the pilot yelled, his voice sharp with urgency. Taking small arms fire. I repeat, we are taking fire. The helicopter lurched violently to the right, the airframe shuddering as something impacted the armor plating with a sound like hammers on an anvil. The distinctive crack of bullets punching through air. Lock and load, Thorne screamed, his voice cutting through the chaos. The other Marines in the cabin instantly shifted from passive passengers to lethal predators, racking the charging handles of their carbines with practiced synchronization. The sound was like bones breaking, sharp and final. Eva grabbed the overhead strap as the helicopter bucked and weaved, the pilot taking evasive maneuvers that made her stomach drop into her boots. For a moment, she was back in Fallujah, spinning toward the ground, the world becoming a centrifuge of fire and metal. Noli Timere, she whispered to herself, the old prayer that had kept her alive through a dozen insertions. Fear not. The door gunner on the right side opened fire, the minigun's rotating barrels creating a sound that was less like gunfire and more like the world being torn in half. The deafening roar shook the fillings in Eva's teeth, rattled her bones, made her remember why she had walked away from this life. But it also made her remember why she had loved it. We're over the LZ, the crew chief shouted, sliding the side door open with a metallic screech. Freezing wind and snow blasted into the cabin, instantly sucking out every ounce of warmth. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in a heartbeat. Eva's breath came out in white plumes. She looked down through the swirling white chaos. Through the snow, she could see the wreckage of the Osprey, a twisted skeleton of metal smoking in the ravine below. Muzzle flashes lit up the tree line like angry fireflies, tracers flying back and forth between the crash site and the surrounding forest in a deadly light show. It was a war zone, and she was about to drop right into the middle of it. It's too hot to land, the pilot screamed over the comms, his voice tight with fear he was trying to control. We have to fast rope. You're up first, ma'am. If we stay in this hover, we're dead. They've got us zeroed. Eva unclipped her safety belt. She grabbed her medical bag, slinging it across her shoulders. The weight settled against her back, familiar and terrifying. She limped to the edge of the open door, the wind tearing at her flight suit, and looked down. 60 feet, maybe more in the swirling snow, a drop into chaos and death, into a situation she had sworn she would never be in again. Her bad leg throbbed in anticipation, the titanium pins aching with phantom pain that was also a memory of real agony. Thorne grabbed her shoulder harness, his face close to hers, his eyes searching. You sure about this, Angel? Eva looked at the maelstrom below. Through the snow and smoke, she saw a figure waving a strobe light in desperate patterns. A signal. Someone down there was still alive, still fighting, still hoping that help would come. David was down there. 7 Marines were down there, and they had asked for her. She had spent 7 years hiding, 7 years being small, 7 years pretending she wasn't who she knew herself to be. No more. Eva pulled her goggles down over her eyes, checked her gloves one last time, and looked at Thorne. "Send me." And then she stepped into the void. The rope burned through Eva's gloves, despite the Kevlar reinforcement, the friction generating heat that battled the biting cold of the mountain air. She descended fast, too fast. The tactical descent designed for young Marines with healthy knees and unbroken bodies, not 40-year-old women with titanium pins holding their bones together like a badly assembled puzzle. But adrenaline is a powerful anesthetic, and fear is an even better motivator. And Eva had learned long ago that the space between terror and action is where heroes are made, or where they die. She focused on the ground rushing up to meet her, her medical training automatically calculating distance and velocity. 30 feet, 20, 10. She tried to flare her legs, tried to land on her good side, positioning her right leg to take the impact. But the uneven terrain of the ravine had other plans. Her boots hit a patch of loose shale that gave way instantly, rocks cascading down the slope with a sound like breaking teeth. Her left leg buckled under the combined weight of her body and the 40-pound trauma bag, and she went down hard, rolling onto her side as white-hot agony exploded up her spine. The pain was blinding, absolute, the kind of hurt that makes the world disappear into a single point of screaming nerves. The titanium pins in her femur felt like they were tearing through bone. Eva gasped, biting her lips so hard she tasted copper, her vision tunneling to gray at the edges. "Move! You have to move! They're shooting at you!" The thought cut through the pain like a blade through fog. Bullets pinged off the rocks inches from her head, the distinctive crack snap of supersonic rounds passing close enough to feel the displacement of air, to feel the heat of their passage. The sniper in the tree line had seen the insertion and was already adjusting his aim, walking his shots toward her. "Suppressing fire!" A voice screamed from somewhere in the wreckage, young and terrified and trying to sound brave. 3 Marines materialized from behind the twisted fuselage of the Osprey, their rifles coming up in synchronized motion that spoke of endless training. They unleashed a wall of lead toward the trees, the muzzle flashes strobing in the gathering darkness, the sound of sustained fire echoing off the canyon walls. It bought Eva the 3 precious seconds she needed to move. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, dragging the heavy medical bag through mud and snow that soaked through her flight suit, ignoring the screaming protest from her left leg that was threatening to make her black out. Diving behind the cover of the Osprey's massive landing gear, she was instantly surrounded by the smell of burnt hydraulic fluid, leaking fuel, and the metallic tang of blood. Fresh blood, a lot of it, too much of it. A hand grabbed her tactical vest and hauled her deeper into cover with surprising strength. Eva looked up into the face of a young Marine, barely out of his teens, his features smeared with camouflage paint and dirt that couldn't hide the terror in his eyes. His pupils were dilated to the point where the irises were barely visible, just pinpricks of color around black voids. Combat stress, adrenaline overload, on the edge of panic. She'd seen it 1,000 times, and she knew how quickly panic could kill everyone. "You made it," he said, his voice cracking slightly, high and tight. "Oh God, you actually made it. I'm Lance Corporal Jake Whitmore. My dad said you'd come. He said Angel 6 always comes when Marines are dying. He said..." Eva grabbed his collar with both hands, pulling him close so she could be heard over the roar of the Black Hawk hovering overhead and the constant crack of gunfire that was coming from too many directions at once. "Jake, listen to me. Where is Commander Garrett? Take me to him. Now." "He's inside. He's bad, ma'am. He's really bad. He keeps asking for you. He won't let anyone else touch him." We tried to stop the bleeding, but show me. Jake led her deeper into the broken aircraft, moving in a combat crouch that spoke of recent training. The interior was a nightmare rendered in flickering red emergency lights. The power system was failing, causing the backup lighting to strobe and pulse, casting everything in a hellish, discontinuous glow that made it hard to judge distances or see details. 4 Marines were positioned at the jagged openings in the hull, their rifles pointing outward, returning fire in controlled bursts. Shell casings littered the deck, rolling and clinking with each impact from outside. The air was thick with gun smoke and the acrid smell of explosives that burned Eva's throat and made her eyes water. In the center of the carnage, lying on a thermal blanket that was already soaked through with blood, was Commander David Garrett. Eva dropped to her knees beside him, and for a moment the combat medic in her fought with the woman who had known this man for 15 years, who owed him her life, who had loved him like the brother she never had. He looked older than she remembered. His hair had gone completely silver since the last time she'd seen him, and his face had the gray, waxy pallor of someone in profound shock, the color of death creeping in from the extremities. A makeshift field dressing was pressed against his neck, already soaked through with bright arterial blood that kept pulsing with each heartbeat. Another bandage was wrapped around his abdomen, but it was doing nothing to stop the bleeding that was pooling beneath him on the deck. Eva's hands moved on autopilot, snapping on blue nitrile gloves that she pulled from her vest. Her training took over, pushing emotion into a locked box that she would open later, if there was a later. Dave. Her voice was soft but steady as she leaned over him, her hands already assessing, checking pulses, evaluating perfusion. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and hazy with pain and shock. He blinked slowly, trying to clear the fog that was pulling him down into darkness. When he finally saw her, when recognition sparked in those dying eyes, a weak, crooked smile touched his blood-flecked lips. "Clara," he rasped, using the nickname only her closest friends were allowed to use. Blood bubbled slightly at the corner of his mouth, a sign of internal bleeding that made Eva's stomach clench with professional dread. "You ignored my direct order to stay retired." "I never was good at following orders," Eva said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them, despite the fear that was trying to claw its way up her throat. She peeled back the neck dressing carefully, assessing the damage with hands that knew exactly what to look for. It was a jagged laceration, deep but relatively clean, missing the carotid artery by millimeters, but nicking the jugular vein. He was losing blood fast, dangerously fast, but it was controllable if she worked quickly. The abdominal wound, however, was the real killer. "Jake, put pressure here." Eva's voice cut through the younger Marine's panic like a knife through silk. She grabbed his hands, which were shaking violently, and placed them firmly on Garrett's neck wound. "2 fingers, constant pressure. Don't let up, not for a second, not even if you think he's dead. If he bleeds out, it's on you. Do you understand me?" Jake nodded frantically, his jaw clenched so tight Eva could see the muscles jumping in his cheek, could see the fear threatening to overwhelm his training. She cut open Garrett's blood-soaked shirt with her trauma shears, exposing his torso. A single bullet entry wound, just below the ribs on the right side. No exit wound. That meant the bullet was still inside, bouncing around, shredding organs with every heartbeat. His abdomen was distended, hard to the touch, rigid. Internal bleeding. Massive internal bleeding from liver damage, maybe kidney, possibly bowel perforation. One of the Marines positioned at a firing port, a stocky corporal with a shattered arm in a makeshift sling, called out vital signs from a portable monitor he had propped against an ammunition box. "Pressure is 70/40 and dropping. Heart rate 130 and climbing. Respiratory rate 28. He's crashing, ma'am. We're losing him." "I need fluid," Eva ordered, her voice calm, clinical, every syllable clear and distinct. "Start a line, 18 gauge, wide bore, Anti-cubital if you can get it. Run it wide open. Suddenly, the hull of the Osprey rang like a massive bell, the sound deafening in the confined space, making everyone flinch. An RPG had impacted somewhere near the nose of the aircraft, maybe 10 feet from where they were working. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling, and for a terrifying moment, Eva thought the whole structure was going to collapse on top of them, burying them all. "They're flanking us!" Jake screamed, his voice cracking into a higher register, taking his hands off Garrett's neck to grab for his rifle. "They're coming down the ridge! We have to—" Eva's hand shot out and grabbed Jake's vest, yanking him back down with surprising force for someone her size. "Keep your hand on that wound, Marine." Her voice was pure command, the voice of someone who had led men into hell and brought them back, the voice that would not be disobeyed. "Let the Force Recon boys handle the shooting. Your job is to be a sandbag. You do not move. You do not think. You do not breathe unless I tell you to. Are we clear?" Jake's eyes were wide with fear, but he nodded and pressed his hands back against Garrett's neck with renewed determination. Garrett's hand suddenly grabbed Eva's wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a man who was actively dying. He pulled her close, his breath shallow and rapid against her ear, each word clearly costing him. "Eva." He coughed, his whole body convulsing with the effort, fresh blood seeping through his bandages. "Listen to me. The laptop. In the cockpit. You have to destroy it." "Not now, Dave," Eva said, injecting morphine into the IV line she had just established in his arm, pushing the plunger slowly. "Save your strength. We'll talk about laptops when you're not dying." "No." He tried to sit up, groaning with the effort, his face contorting in agony. "It's not drug runners out there. It's mercenaries, black ops contractors. They want the laptop. It has coordinates to a stolen nuclear weapons cache. Russian-made tactical nukes that went missing from a Ukrainian depot." Eva froze for a split second, her hands still working but her mind racing through the implications. "The training exercise was a cover story," Garrett continued, each word clearly costing him, his breathing becoming more labored. "We were tracking the weapons, got too close to their staging area. They shot us down to cover their tracks. If they get that laptop, they'll kill everyone here to tie up loose ends. You have to get Jake out. Get the boy to safety. Promise me. Leave me if you have to, but get him out." "I'm not leaving you." Eva's voice was fierce, her eyes blazing as she leaned close to his face, close enough to see her reflection in his dilated pupils. "I walked out on Marcus Ashford's shift to be here, David. I quit my job, burned that bridge to the ground. I am not going back empty-handed. You are going to live, even if I have to carry you out myself." "Incoming!" someone shouted from the forward position. The world exploded. A mortar round landed just outside the open hatch, close enough that the concussion wave picked Eva up like a rag doll and threw her against the bulkhead with bone-crushing force. Her head slammed into the metal with a sickening crack, and her vision went black for a moment, stars exploding behind her eyelids in brilliant supernovas of pain. She shook her head violently, fighting the ringing in her ears that sounded like cathedral bells, fighting the nausea rising in her throat. When her vision cleared, she saw chaos. Jake was on the ground, dazed, blood running from his nose in twin streams. Garrett was unconscious, and the monitor that had been tracking his vitals was emitting a single, continuous tone that Eva knew too well. Flatline. And standing at the breach in the hull, silhouetted against the snow and the strobing muzzle flashes, were three figures. They weren't wearing the mismatched tactical gear of drug runners or the ragged uniforms of insurgents. These men were professionals, high-end plate carriers with ceramic trauma plates, integrated communication systems with encrypted radios, night vision goggles mounted on ballistic helmets, suppressed vector submachine guns held in perfect firing stances that spoke of years of training. Mercenaries, Corporate soldiers. The kind of men who killed for money and slept fine at night, who had no flag, no loyalty except to the highest bidder. One of them raised his weapon, the suppressor tracking smoothly toward Jake Whitmore's unconscious form with mechanical precision. The general's son, high-value target, witness to be eliminated, and completely defenseless. Eva didn't think. There was no time for thought, no space for analysis or planning or weighing options. The muscle memory of 1,000 drills kicked in, overriding the fear, overriding the pain, overriding everything except the imperative to protect. She was unarmed. Her sidearm was still holstered on Captain Thorne's belt back on the helicopter, forgotten in the chaos of the descent. Her medical status theoretically protected her under the Geneva Convention. But these men clearly didn't care about international law or the rules of war. She grabbed the only thing within reach, a flare gun from the emergency survival kit strapped to the bulkhead wall, designed for signaling search and rescue teams, for marking positions, not for combat. Eva raised it with both hands, aimed at the lead mercenary's center mass, and pulled the trigger without hesitation. The flare hit him square in the chest plate with a sound like a hammer striking steel. It didn't penetrate the armor. The ceramic plate did its job, stopping the projectile. But the phosphorus core ignited on impact, burning at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, turning his tactical vest into a funeral pyre in the space of a heartbeat. The man screamed, a sound that was barely human, that spoke of agony beyond comprehension. He thrashed and clawed at his chest as white-hot fire consumed him, melting through the Kevlar, through the ceramic, through skin and muscle. He dropped his weapon and fell backward into the snow, rolling, thrashing. But phosphorus doesn't care about snow. It burns underwater. It burns in a vacuum. It burns until there's nothing left to burn. The other two mercenaries flinched, their night vision goggles amplifying the magnesium-bright flare into a blinding supernova that overloaded their optics. They stumbled backward, hands coming up to protect their eyes, their perfect tactical formation collapsing into confusion and pain. "Clear the door!" Eva screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice raw. Captain Silas Thorne dropped from the ceiling hatch like an avenging god, his rope still attached to the Blackhawk hovering overhead. He landed on the second mercenary with both boots, driving the man into the deck with bone-crushing force that Eva heard even over the gunfire. His combat knife flashed once in the red emergency lighting, a silver arc of death, and the mercenary stopped moving, stopped breathing, became nothing but meat and regret. The third mercenary was already raising his weapon, trying to acquire a target through his damaged night vision, when two of the Marines from the defensive positions converged on him like wolves on wounded prey. It was over in seconds. Professional, brutal, final. No mercy given, none expected. But the gunfire outside was intensifying. The rescue team had arrived, but the mercenaries were regrouping, bringing up heavier weapons. Eva could hear the distinct sound of a heavy machine gun being positioned, the metallic clank of an ammunition belt being fed. And inside the Osprey, David Garrett's heart had stopped. "I need light," Eva yelled, already moving back to Garrett's side, her medical training overriding everything else. "Someone give me light." One of the Marines pulled a tactical flashlight from his vest and pointed it at the makeshift operating theater. The beam was harsh and unforgiving, casting sharp shadows that made everything look even more nightmarish, more surreal. "Starting compressions," Jake said, his voice shaking but determined, finding courage in action. He was on his knees beside Garrett, placing his hands on the older man's sternum, beginning chest compressions like he'd been taught. "Too fast," Eva corrected him, her own hands moving rapidly, assembling the equipment she would need, pulling supplies from her trauma bag with practiced efficiency. "Slow down. Let the chest recoil completely between compressions. You're not helping if you don't let the heart refill with blood. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Keep count." She knew what she had to do. The knowledge sat in her gut like a stone, heavy and cold and unavoidable. Garrett needed a thoracotomy, an emergency thoracotomy. She needed to open his chest, clamp the descending aorta to redirect blood flow to his brain and heart, and hope that she could keep him alive long enough to get him to a real hospital with real equipment and real surgeons. But doing open heart surgery in a freezing, dirty helicopter wreck while under active fire, with inadequate lighting and no proper surgical instruments, was insanity. It was suicide for the patient. He's already dead, a voice whispered in her mind, cold and clinical. This is his only chance. Do it or watch him die. Get me the scalpel, Eva ordered, her voice eerily calm, the calm of someone who had made peace with what came next. And the betadine, pour it everywhere. I don't care about sterile technique anymore, just pour it. The Marine with the broken arm fumbled in the trauma bag, pulling out the sterile packages with shaking hands that could barely grip. What are you doing? Jake asked, breathless from the compressions, confusion and fear warring on his young face as he looked at the instruments Eva was laying out. I'm going to clamp his aorta, Eva said, her hands already moving, tearing open Garrett's shirt the rest of the way, exposing his pale chest that was covered in old scars from previous wounds. Stop compressions. He has no pulse. I know, that's why I'm cutting him open. Step back. Jake's face went white, but he stopped compressions and grabbed the flashlight, holding it steady with hands that trembled. Eva made the incision, a long, vertical cut down the center of Garrett's chest, from the notch at the base of his throat to just below his sternum. In a proper hospital, this would be done with careful precision, with cautery to control bleeding, with retractors and assistance, and sterile technique and proper anesthesia. Here it was crude and fast and desperate, and fueled by love and duty, and the refusal to let another person die on her watch. Blood didn't flow from the incision. Garrett's pressure was zero. He was clinically dead, had been for almost 2 minutes. Eva used a rib spreader from the heavy rescue kit, a brutal instrument designed for exactly this kind of field emergency, for battlefield medicine where pretty didn't matter and survival was everything. She placed it in the incision and began cranking it open, forcing the ribs apart. The sound of Garrett's sternum cracking was wet and horrible, like green wood breaking, like bones snapping in a car crash. Jake turned his head and vomited onto the deck, but his hands never wavered on the flashlight, never moved from their position. Eva reached into the chest cavity, her hands disappearing inside the body of the man who had saved her life 8 years ago in a desert on the other side of the world. Her fingers were warm inside his thorax, a stark contrast to the freezing wind howling through the breached hull, to the snow that was starting to accumulate on the deck. She found the descending aorta by feel, a thick, muscular tube running along the spine, pulsing weakly. She pressed it against the vertebrae with her fingers, physically clamping it shut, cutting off blood flow to everything below the diaphragm. "Epi, 1 milligram," she shouted. The Marine with the broken arm injected epinephrine directly into the IV line, the powerful stimulant flooding Garrett's system, trying to jumpstart a heart that had given up. Eva squeezed Garrett's heart manually with her other hand. The organ felt like a dead bird in her palm, cool and flaccid and utterly still, a muscle that had forgotten its purpose. Once, nothing. Twice, nothing. "Come on, Dave," Eva hissed through clenched teeth, her voice breaking. "Don't you die on me. Not here, not in the snow, not after I came all this way. You don't get to die saving me twice. You don't get to keep my gear for 7 years and then die. I won't allow it." 3 times. A flutter. Weak. Barely there, but a flutter. "I got a rhythm." Eva's voice cracked with something that might have been hope, might have been disbelief. Come on, you stubborn bastard." Thump, thump. The heart began to beat on its own, struggling, irregular, the rhythm of a dying engine trying to turn over. but beating. By clamping the aorta, Eva had diverted all of Garrett's remaining blood volume to his brain and heart, essentially sacrificing everything below the diaphragm to keep the vital organs alive. It was a temporary measure, a stopgap that would buy them maybe 30 minutes before the ischemic damage to his kidneys and liver became irreversible. But 30 minutes was enough to get him on the helicopter. 30 minutes was enough to get him to a hospital. 30 minutes was a lifetime in combat medicine. "Pulse is back," the Marine announced, his voice filled with awe, with something like religious reverence. "Weak but palpable. Blood pressure 60/30. He's alive. Holy shit, he's alive." "We have to move him now," Eva said, carefully withdrawing her hand from Garrett's chest, but leaving a surgical clamp in place to hold the aorta compressed, the metal instrument protruding from between his ribs like some obscene medical experiment. "If we wait, he dies from hypothermia before he bleeds out. His core temp is already dropping." She keyed her headset with a blood-slicked hand, leaving red smears on the plastic. "Captain Thorne, status?" "Hostiles are retreating to regroup." Thorne's voice was breathless, punctuated by gunfire and shouted commands. "But they're bringing up heavy weapons. RPGs, maybe a heavy machine gun. We have maybe a 3-minute window before they hit us with something we can't survive." "Is the package ready to move?" "Package is critical but stable," Eva replied, looking down at Garrett's open chest, at the clamp protruding from between his ribs like some nightmare-made flesh. "We need hoist extraction immediately. He won't survive being carried up the ravine." "The weather is zero visibility, Angel," the pilot cut in, his voice tight with stress and fear. "I can't see the ground. I can't see the trees. I'm flying on instruments and prayers, and I'm about 30 seconds from having to abort." "Follow my voice," Eva yelled back, her voice raw. "I'm popping green smoke now. Follow the smoke." She grabbed a smoke canister from the survival kit and threw it out through the rear hatch with all her strength. Thick green smoke billowed out instantly, whipped away by the wind but visible enough against the white snow, a beacon in the storm. The roar of the Black Hawk increased, the downdraft from the rotors nearly knocking everyone over. Loose equipment started flying around the interior of the Osprey. Medical supplies, spent shell casings, pieces of debris, and Eva had to shield Garrett's open chest with her body, becoming a human shield against the chaos. The rescue basket was lowered on a steel cable, swinging wildly in the rotor wash like a pendulum from hell. "Get him in," Eva ordered, her voice barely audible over the noise. "Careful with the clamp. If it comes out, he's dead." It took all of them, 4 Marines and Eva, lifting Garrett's limp body as carefully as they could, while bullets continued to ping off the wreckage around them, while the world tried to kill them. They positioned him in the basket, and Eva had to physically hold the surgical clamp in place with one hand, running alongside the basket with the other hand gripping the rim as they dragged it toward the open area where the cable hung. A bullet struck the metal rail of the basket, the impact sending sparks flying in a bright cascade. The round ricocheted off with a high-pitched whine that made everyone flinch, made Jake cry out in fear. "Go, go, go!" Thorne screamed, laying down suppressive fire with his rifle, the muzzle flashes illuminating his face in strobing intervals, making him look like a demon from mythology. The basket began to lift, pulled upward by the winch, spinning slowly. Eva hooked her own carabiner to the cable above the basket with practiced efficiency. She wasn't going to ride up separately. She needed to monitor Garrett every second of the ascent, needed to make sure the clamp didn't slip, needed to be ready if his heart stopped again. They lifted off the ground together, swinging wildly in the wind like a gruesome pendulum, like a nightmare carnival ride. Eva wrapped her legs around the basket, her body forming a human shield over Garrett's exposed chest, over the surgical clamp that was the only thing keeping him alive. Below them, the ravine was a light show of tracer rounds and muzzle flashes, green and red and white streaks cutting through the darkness like laser beams. Above them, the dark belly of the Black Hawk represented safety, salvation, the thin line between life and death. They reached the halfway point, suspended 50 feet above the killing ground, when the entire cable jerked to a sudden, violent stop. They hung there, swaying in the brutal wind, going nowhere, suspended between earth and sky. Jammed! The crew chief's voice was panicked over the comms, higher pitched than it should be. Hydraulic failure on the secondary winch. I can't pull you up. The primary is offline. Eva looked down. Through the swirling snow, through the chaos, she could see figures emerging from the tree line. The mercenaries were coming out of cover, and they were setting up something on a tripod, something that reflected the light in a way that made Eva's blood run cold. An RPG launcher. They were going to shoot her and Garrett out of the sky like clay pigeons at a shooting range. Manual crank? The pilot's voice was desperate, begging for options. It'll take 4 minutes, the crew chief yelled back, his voice breaking. Maybe more in this wind. We don't have 4 minutes, Eva said, her voice surprisingly calm for someone hanging from a cable in a snowstorm, while people tried to kill her, while death reached up from below and disaster loomed above. Thorne's voice cut through the radio chatter from the ground, urgent and afraid in a way that Marines weren't supposed to sound. Angel 6, they're setting up an RPG. You're the target. If that thing launches clean, you're both dead. They've got the range dialed in. Eva looked at the cable above her, at the mechanism that had failed. She looked at the open door of the helicopter, where the crew chief was frantically cranking a manual winch lever, his face contorted with effort. She looked down at the dark shapes assembling the rocket launcher in the snow below, taking their time, confident in their shot. Then she reached into her tactical vest and pulled out the sidearm that Thorne had given her before the insertion. A standard-issue Beretta M9, 15 rounds, effective range maybe 50 yards in ideal conditions. She was hanging from a swaying cable, 50 feet in the air, in near-zero visibility, in high wind, trying to shoot a target on the ground who was also trying to kill her. The odds of making this shot were astronomical, impossible, the kind of thing you saw in movies, but never in real life. But Eva had never been very good at accepting impossible odds. That's what had earned her the Navy Cross in the first place. She wrapped her left arm through the cable for stability, feeling the steel bite into her flesh, even through the flight suit, cutting into her bicep. With her right hand, she aimed the Beretta downward, timing the sway of the cable, watching the mercenary kneel behind the RPG launcher, watching him settle into his firing position. She took a deep breath, let it out slowly, the way she had been taught on 100 rifle ranges, in a dozen different countries, by instructors who had promised her she'd need this someday. Noli timere, she whispered, the prayer that had kept her alive for 15 years. Fear not. And she fired. The recoil of the Beretta kicked against Eva's palm, a sharp snap that jarred her whole arm, that made the cable swing more violently. The muzzle flash was bright in the darkness, momentarily blinding her night-adapted vision, leaving purple afterimages burned into her retinas. 50 feet below, the mercenary aiming the RPG launcher jerked backward, his head snapping to the side at an unnatural angle. He crumpled into the snow like a puppet with cut strings, and the RPG fired wild as his dying fingers clenched on the trigger, the rocket streaking off at a 45-degree angle and detonating harmlessly against the canyon wall in a shower of sparks and stone and orange fire. "Clear! We are clear!" Eva screamed into her headset, though the wind snatched the words away almost before she could speak them, carrying them off into the storm. The manual winch groaned, a terrible metal-on-metal screeching that vibrated down the cable and into Eva's bones, into her teeth. Inch by agonizing inch, the basket rose. Eva kept her legs wrapped tightly around it, her body acting as a shield against the wind and any stray rounds from below, against the cold that was trying to steal the warmth from her core. But her eyes never left Garrett's chest. The aortic clamp was slipping. She could see it. The vibration of the ascent, the swaying of the cable, the buffeting wind, All of it was working the surgical instrument loose, millimeter by millimeter. If it popped off, if it lost purchase on the vessel, Garrett would bleed out in seconds. His heart would pump his remaining blood into his chest cavity, and he would be dead before they reached the helicopter, dead before she could do anything to save him. "Steady!" Eva yelled at the crew chief as her head cleared the floor of the Blackhawk, as she rose into the relative safety of the cabin. "Don't jerk the cable. Smooth pulls." Strong hands grabbed her tactical vest. Captain Thorne and the crew chief hauled the basket into the cabin with a heave that nearly dislocated Eva's shoulder, that made her cry out in pain. They slid it across the diamond plate floor, securing it with quick, practiced movements, with webbing in tie-downs. "Pilot, get us out of here!" Thorne roared, his voice raw. "Nap of the earth! Stay below the ridgeline. Maximum speed." The Black Hawk banked violently, diving over the edge of the canyon to escape the kill zone, using the terrain to break line of sight with the shooters below. The G-forces pressed Eva into the floor, making her stomach lurch, making her head spin, but she didn't let go of the clamp, didn't let go of Garrett. "I need light," she barked, her voice hoarse. "He's fibrillating again. His rhythm is unstable." The cabin was bathed in red tactical lighting, turning everything the color of blood, the color of war. Eva worked in this crimson hell, her hands moving with practiced precision, while the helicopter shook and bucked through the turbulent mountain air, while the pilot threw the aircraft around like a toy. The pressure was fluctuating wildly. Every time the pilot changed altitude or direction, it affected the patient, affected the delicate balance between life and death. Garrett was technically dead, kept alive only by Eva's hand on his aorta and the epinephrine flooding his system in sheer, stubborn will. Jake Whitmore, the general's son, was huddled in the corner of the cabin, staring at Eva with eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. He had just watched a middle-aged nurse with a limp rappel down a rope under fire, perform open-heart surgery in a combat zone, and shoot a man from a swinging cable 50 feet in the air. Is he going to make it? Jake's voice was small, almost childlike, the voice of a boy pretending to be a man. "Hold this IV bag," Eva ordered, not answering the question because she didn't know the answer, because hope was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. She grabbed Jake's hands and wrapped them around the bag of saline. "Every time I nod at you, you squeeze it. Push the fluid into his veins. Hard. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Eva looked at the monitor. Garrett's vitals were erratic, his heart rhythm chaotic and unstable, threatening to deteriorate into ventricular fibrillation at any moment. She needed to pack the chest cavity properly, needed to stabilize the clamp, needed to keep him from going into full arrest before they reached the hospital. "Captain Thorne, get me on comms with the receiving hospital," Eva said, her hands deep in Garrett's chest, adjusting the gauze packing around the clamp, around the still beating heart. "We need to divert from the base. He won't make the flight to Joint Base Lewis McChord. Flight time is too long. He'll be dead before we land." "Negative, Angel," Thorne said, listening to his earpiece, his face troubled and conflicted. "Command says the package is too sensitive. The laptop, the classified data on the nuclear weapons. We can't bring that into the civilian sector. Orders are to proceed to Lewis McChord for secure transfer." Eva looked up, and Thorne actually took a step back from the fury in her eyes, from the rage that made her seem 10 feet tall despite her small frame. "I don't care about the laptop, Captain." Her voice was ice and iron and absolute conviction. "I care about the man who saved my life in Fallujah, the man who kept my gear for 7 years. He has a clamped aorta and an open chest. Seattle Memorial is 6 minutes out. The base is 20. If we fly to Lewis McChord, you will be landing with a corpse. His kidneys are already shutting down from lack of perfusion. His liver is dying. Every minute we wait, more organs fail. This isn't about politics. This is about physics." She leaned forward, and despite being half Thorne's size and covered in blood, despite hanging from a helicopter cable 30 seconds ago, she was terrifying in her intensity. Do you want to explain to General Whitmore why his son's savior died because of protocol? Do you want to be the one to tell him that we had a chance to save Commander Garrett, but we chose paperwork over a man's life? Do you want to live with that decision for the rest of your career? Thorne hesitated. He looked at Garrett, at the man's gray face, at the heart monitor showing an increasingly unstable rhythm. Then he looked at Jake Whitmore, at the boy whose life Garrett had saved. Then back at Eva. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had earned her the Navy Cross, the same intensity that had kept 7 Marines alive when anyone else would have given up, would have triaged Garrett as expected and moved on to more salvageable patients. He keyed his radio, his jaw set. "Command, this is Dagger 1-1. We are declaring a medical emergency. Patient will not survive transport to the base. Critical condition, multiple organ failure imminent, diverting to Seattle Memorial Hospital per medical officer's orders." The radio crackled with angry voices. Someone in a command center somewhere trying to assert authority over a situation they couldn't possibly understand, trying to make decisions based on politics rather than medical reality. "Dagger 1-1, negative. Abort diversion. You are ordered to proceed to Lewis McCord. This is a direct order from—" Thorne reached up and switched the radio to a different frequency, cutting off the transmission mid-sentence. "Pilot, punch it. Seattle Memorial, fastest route. I'll take responsibility for the decision." "Copy that, Captain," the pilot responded, and the engine whine increased as he pushed the throttle to maximum, as the Black Hawk's engines screamed with effort. Eva focused back on Garrett, her world narrowing to the space between his broken ribs, to the rhythmic pumping of his heart beneath her hands. "Stay with me, Dave. We're almost home. Just hold on a little longer." The flight was a blur of alarms and desperate measures, of small victories and near losses. Twice, Garrett's blood pressure bottomed out, dropping so low the monitor couldn't read it, showing only dashes. Twice, Eva had to manually massage his heart, her hand rhythmically squeezing the organ through the surgical opening, while the Marines watched in reverent silence, while Jake Whitmore prayed in a whisper, while Thorne stood ready to take over compressions if Eva's strength failed. When the Seattle skyline came into view, lights glittering against the dark waters of Puget Sound like a constellation brought to Earth, Eva felt something that might have been hope surge in her chest. But as they approached the hospital, that hope curdled into rage. The helipad on the roof of Seattle Memorial was illuminated, the landing lights bright and welcoming, painted lines fresh and clear. But it was empty. No medical team waiting with a gurney, no trauma surgeon standing by in gown and gloves, no nurses ready with equipment, and security guards were blocking the door to the stairwell, their arms crossed, their faces set in determined opposition. "They aren't ready for us," Eva realized, her voice flat with fury and disbelief. "Ashford blocked the landing, that arrogant son of a—" "He what?" Thorne's voice was a growl, was the sound of barely controlled violence. "Dr. Marcus Ashford, he's the chief of trauma. He probably thinks this is some kind of stunt, or he's still angry that I resigned, or he doesn't believe Garrett is real. Whatever the reason, he's going to let this man die out of spite." Eva's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached, so hard she thought they might crack. Thorne racked the charging handle of his rifle with a sound like a guillotine blade falling, like judgment being pronounced. "Set it down, pilot. Right on top of the H. If anyone gets in her way, I'll remove them. Permanently if necessary." The Black Hawk flared over the hospital roof, the wash kicking up debris and sending the security guards stumbling backward, making them cover their faces against the wind and dust. The wheels slammed down onto the painted landing zone with a jarring impact that made everyone grunt, that rattled teeth and bones. Before the rotors even started to slow, before the engines began to wind down, Thorne kicked the door open with explosive force. He jumped out, his rifle held in a low-ready position, his team fanning out behind him in a tactical formation that looked like it belonged in Fallujah or Kandahar, not on a hospital roof in Seattle. The security guards who had been ordered to deny access to the roof took one look at the heavily armed Force Recon Marines in full combat gear and backed away, hands raised, wanting no part of whatever was about to happen, understanding on an instinctive level that this was beyond their pay grade. Eva unbuckled from her seat with shaking hands. She grabbed the side of the rescue basket. "On my count," she said to the Marines helping her, her voice steady despite everything. 1, 2, 3. They rushed Garrett out of the helicopter, the wind from the rotors whipping Eva's hair across her face, stinging her eyes with grit. She limped heavily, her left leg screaming in protest after the abuse it had taken, after rappelling and crawling and running, but she didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. She ran alongside the basket, her hands still holding the surgical clamp inside Garrett's open chest, still maintaining that tenuous connection between life and death. They burst through the roof access door and into the stairwell. Eva didn't wait for the elevator, didn't trust it, didn't want to be trapped in a small box. They carried the basket down one flight to the main hospital level, boots thundering on the concrete steps, the sound echoing like drum beats, like a war march, like destiny approaching. "Trauma Bay 1, Eva ordered, her voice carrying authority that had nothing to do with her employment status. "Someone page Dr. Ashford. Tell him if he isn't there in 30 seconds, I'm doing the surgery myself. Tell him Angel 6 is here and she's not asking permission." The elevator doors at the bottom of the stairs dinged open, and they emerged onto the main floor of the emergency department, into chaos. The ER staff had heard the helicopter. The whole city had probably heard the helicopter, had seen it flying dangerously low over residential neighborhoods. But no one knew what was happening. When the elevator doors opened and Eva burst out, flanked by 4 heavily armed Marines in full combat gear, pushing a basket containing a man whose chest was literally cracked open with a surgical clamp protruding from between his ribs, the entire floor froze. Time seemed to stop. Motion ceased. Breathing halted. Nurses stopped mid-step, their mouths falling open. Patients in the waiting room stared with expressions of shock and fear, some reaching for their phones to record, others shrinking back. A resident dropped the chart he was holding, and it clattered to the floor with a sound like breaking glass, like a spell being broken. Dr. Marcus Ashford was standing at the nurses' station, holding a cup of coffee, laughing at something a resident had said, his face relaxed and confident. He turned at the commotion, and the smile died on his face like someone had flipped a switch, like someone had shown him his own death. He saw Eva, but it wasn't the Eva he knew. This woman was wearing a blood-soaked flight suit that was torn and muddy. Her hair was wild, matted with sweat and grime, impossibly blood. Her face was smeared with camouflage paint and dirt. She moved with terrifying intensity, with purpose, the limp in her gait now looking like the stride of a wounded predator rather than a broken nurse, looking like someone who had been to war and brought war back with them. "Get out of my way!" Eva's voice cut through the silence like a whip crack, like thunder. "Hardwell?" Ashford sputtered, his coffee cup tilting in his hand, hot liquid sloshing onto his pristine shoes, staining the white leather brown. "You resigned. You can't just bring a patient in here. This is highly irregular. I'll have you arrested for—" Eva didn't slow down, didn't even look at him. She just started rattling off the medical report in a voice that could have stripped paint, that allowed no argument, no discussion. "Male, 52, gunshot wound to the right upper quadrant abdomen, no exit wound, bullet still inside, penetrating trauma to the neck with jugular laceration. Emergency thoracotomy performed in field. Descending aorta manually clamped. I need OR1 prepped immediately. Type and cross for 10 units O negative. Start massive transfusion protocol. Get me a vascular surgeon. Get me a cardiothoracic surgeon. Get me everyone. Now." She rolled past him without breaking stride, heading directly for Trauma Bay 1, her hand never leaving the clamp, never wavering. Ashford ran after them, his face red with indignation and confusion, and something that might have been fear. "Security! Stop her! She's practicing medicine without a license. She's just a nurse. She's—" He reached out to grab Eva's arm as she was transferring Garrett from the basket to the hospital bed, as she was trying to coordinate the delicate movement without disturbing the clamp. Before his fingers could make contact with her flight suit, Captain Thorne stepped in like a wall of muscle and violence, suddenly manifesting between them. The massive Marine didn't shout. He didn't make threats. He didn't need to. He simply placed one gloved hand against Ashford's chest and shoved him backward against the wall, hard enough to knock the wind out of him, hard enough to crack plaster, to leave an impression. "Touch her again," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a subsonic frequency that vibrated in the chest, that bypassed the brain and spoke directly to the hindbrain, to the part of humans that remembered being prey. "And you will need a trauma surgeon yourself, and she'll be too busy to help you." Ashford gasped, trying to catch his breath, looking up at Thorne's scarred face, at the man who looked like he ate nails for breakfast and asked for seconds. "This is my hospital," he wheezed, trying to reassert authority, trying to cling to the familiar hierarchies. "And that," Thorne gestured to Garrett on the bed, to the dying man with the open chest, "is my commanding officer. And she," he pointed at Eva with something like reverence, "is the only reason he's still breathing. You will take orders from her, or you will stand down. Those are your only options. Choose quickly." Ashford looked around the room, looking for support, for allies. The entire ER staff was watching. Sarah Mitchell was there, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes shining with tears and pride. The young intern Davis was staring at Eva like he was seeing her for the first time, like he was witnessing a miracle or a revelation. The other nurses, the ones who had ignored her for years, who had laughed at her limp and dismissed her suggestions, were frozen in shock and something that might have been shame. They weren't looking at Ashford with the usual mixture of fear and admiration. They were looking at Eva, at the woman they had dismissed as the slow nurse, the broken one, the invisible one. And she was commanding a room full of special forces operators like she owned the place, like she'd been born to do this. "Dr. Ashford," Eva's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts like a laser. She still hadn't looked up from Garrett, her hands busy connecting him to the hospital monitors, establishing better IV access, her movements economical and precise. "I need a vascular surgeon to repair the aorta. Are you going to scrub in, or do I need to call someone competent? Because time is a factor here, and I don't have patience for ego right now. Answer quickly." The insult hung in the air, sharp and brutal. A reversal of every humiliation he had inflicted on her over the past 2 years, every dismissive comment, every condescending order. Ashford swallowed his pride. It went down like broken glass, like ground metal, but he swallowed it, because he could see the open chest. He could see the surgical clamp protruding from between the ribs like something from a nightmare. And he realized with a sinking feeling in his gut, with a professional assessment that cut through his ego, the level of skill it had taken to perform that procedure in a helicopter, in a war zone, while under fire. He looked at Eva's hands. They were steady as bedrock, not a tremor, not a shake. Despite everything she'd been through, despite the combat and the rappelling and the shooting, her hands were rock steady. "I'll scrub in," Ashford muttered, his voice barely audible, his ego crumbling. "Good." Eva finally looked at him, and her eyes were cold, were merciless in their assessment. "But I'm lead surgeon on this case. You repair the vessel. I manage the patient. I call the shots. Are we clear? Say yes or no. Nothing else." "That's highly irregular," Ashford said weakly, making one last attempt to assert authority. "Do it, or get out of my way so I can find someone who will. And Marcus Ashford, the star trauma surgeon, the man whose face was on billboards, the man who had never taken orders from anyone, certainly not from a nurse, nodded his head in defeat. Yes, ma'am. The operating room was a cathedral of sterile white light and gleaming steel, so different from the blood-soaked chaos of the Osprey wreckage that it felt like stepping into another dimension, another world entirely. Eva stood at the scrub sink, methodically washing her hands and forearms, with the practiced movements of someone who had done this thousands of times, watching the brown water circle the drain in hypnotic spirals. Garrett's blood, mercenary blood, her own blood from a dozen small cuts she hadn't noticed until the warm water found them, until they began to sting. The water ran clear, but she kept scrubbing. Old habit. In combat medicine, you scrubbed 3 times as long because the consequences of infection were catastrophic, because antibiotics were a luxury, and sterile technique was the difference between life and death. Even now, in a modern hospital with antibiotics and sterile technique and every advantage, she couldn't break the pattern, couldn't silence the voice in her head that said, "Cleaner, cleaner, you can never be clean enough." Behind her, through the observation window, she could see the OR team prepping Garrett with military efficiency, nurses moving with practiced precision, arranging instrument trays in perfect order, hanging bags of blood products on IV poles. The anesthesiologist was at the head of the table, carefully monitoring the makeshift intubation that Eva had performed in the helicopter, making adjustments, optimizing oxygen delivery. And Marcus Ashford was there, already gowned and gloved, staring down at the open chest cavity with an expression Eva couldn't quite read. Awe, maybe. Or fear. Possibly both. Definitely humility, an emotion she'd never seen on his face before. Sarah Mitchell appeared beside Eva at the sink, her blue eyes wide with something that looked like pride mixed with disbelief, with joy and shock in equal measure. "Eva, the entire hospital is talking about you. The Marines, the helicopter, what you did out there." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper, became conspiratorial and excited. "I looked up your service record, the parts that aren't classified anyway, the Navy Cross, Fallujah. You saved 17 people while your leg was shattered, while you were bleeding out yourself. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Why did you let us think?" Eva dried her hands carefully, methodically, each finger individually, the towel rough against her skin. "Because it doesn't matter what you were, Sarah, only what you are. And here, I was just a slow nurse with a limp. That's what people needed me to be, so that's what I was." "You were never just anything," Sarah said fiercely, her voice passionate, her hands gripping Eva's arm. "You were always this. We just couldn't see it. We were blind." Eva looked at her younger colleague, at the conviction in her face, at the admiration and shame mixed together, and felt something warm in her chest, something that had been cold for 7 years. "You're going to be a hell of a nurse someday, Sarah. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Don't let anyone make you small." She pushed through the OR doors, arms raised to keep her hands sterile, water dripping from her elbows. A surgical nurse helped her into a gown, tied it in the back with practiced efficiency, snapped gloves onto her hands that fit like a second skin. Eva approached the operating table and looked down at David Garrett. His chest was still open, the ribs spread with the retractor like a grotesque flower blooming, the surgical clamp visible among the packing gauze that Eva had placed in the field. His face was slack, peaceful under anesthesia, the lines of pain smoothed away by powerful drugs. If you ignored everything from the neck down, if you focused only on his face, he could have been sleeping, could have been resting comfortably. Ashford stood across from her, and for the first time since Eva had known him, since she'd suffered under his arrogance and cruelty, he looked uncertain, vulnerable. The arrogance that usually surrounded him like armor was gone, stripped away by the reality of what lay before him, by the undeniable evidence of Eva's skill and courage. Dr. Ashford, Eva said, her voice carrying the tone of command despite the surgical mask muffling it, despite the fatigue that was trying to drag her down. You're the lead vascular surgeon in this hospital, one of the best on the West Coast, or so I've heard. I need you to repair the aortic injury. I'll manage hemodynamics and handle the abdominal trauma. We work together, or this man dies. Can you do this? I need to know right now, yes or no. Ashford met her eyes across the table, across the body of a dying man. I don't know, he said, and the honesty in his voice was startling, was brave in its own way. That boy, Trevor Dawson, he died. Tension pneumothorax. Exactly like you said, exactly like you diagnosed. I was too arrogant to listen, and he died. His parents are filing a lawsuit. Senator Dawson wants my medical license, and they're right to want it. I killed their son because I wouldn't listen to a nurse. The OR went silent. The nurses froze, glancing at each other with wide eyes. Even the anesthesiologist looked up from his monitors, his hands pausing in their work. Eva carefully removed the packing gauze from around the clamp, exposing the surgical field with delicate movements. You're right, Marcus. Trevor Dawson died because you didn't listen, because you thought your medical degree made you infallible, and you're going to have to live with that for the rest of your life. You're going to see his face every time you close your eyes. You're going to wonder what kind of man he would have become, what he would have achieved, who he would have loved. She paused, her eyes boring into Ashford's, unflinching and merciless in their honesty. But right now, David Garrett is alive. Barely, but alive. And whether he stays alive depends on whether you can put your ego aside and do your job. Whether you can learn from your mistake instead of being destroyed by it. Another pause, letting that sink in, letting him process. You're a brilliant surgeon, Marcus. When you're not trying to prove you're the smartest person in the room, when you're just focused on the work, your hands are steady and your technique is flawless. I've watched you. I know what you're capable of. So stop trying to prove anything. Just be what you're capable of being. Be the surgeon Trevor Dawson deserved. Be that surgeon now, for David. Ashford took a shaky breath, his chest rising and falling unevenly. Then he nodded, some of his confidence returning, but tempered now with humility. Okay, talk me through it. Teach me. First, we need proximal and distal control, Eva said, shifting into teaching mode, her voice becoming clinical and precise. Clamp above and below the injury site. That gives us a bloodless field to work in. Then we can remove my field clamp and assess the damage properly. The repair will depend on what we find. Could be primary repair, could need a patch, might need a graft if the damage is extensive. Ashford's hands moved to the exposed aorta, and Eva watched him carefully, assessing his state of mind, his readiness. His fingers trembled slightly as he placed the first vascular clamp, a fine tremor that spoke of nerves, of doubt. The tremor of a man who had just realized he wasn't infallible, who had learned the cost of arrogance in the worst possible way. Steady, Eva said quietly, her voice gentle now, encouraging. Your hands know what to do. You've done this 100 times. Trust your training. Trust your hands. The tremor stopped. Ashford took a breath, centered himself, and placed the clamp perfectly, with textbook precision. Then the second one below the injury, equally perfect. Eva carefully removed her makeshift clamp, the one that had been holding David Garrett's life together for the past 40 minutes, the one that had kept him alive through a helicopter ride and a rooftop landing and God knew what else. Blood welled up immediately, but it was controlled now, contained between the surgical clamps. Ashford leaned in, examining the laceration in the vessel wall with the intensity of a jeweler examining a diamond. It's repairable, he said, and there was relief in his voice, genuine relief mixed with professional satisfaction. Clean edges. The bullet must have just grazed it. I can do a primary repair with running 6-0 Proline. Should hold well. Then do it, Eva said, her voice firm. I'll handle the abdominal cavity. We work in parallel. For the next hour, they worked in synchronized silence, broken only by quiet requests for instruments, by updates on vital signs, by the rhythmic beeping of monitors that said, life, life, life. Eva explored Garrett's abdomen with careful fingers, finding the bullet lodged against the posterior abdominal wall, having miraculously missed the aorta, missed the vena cava, missed every major vessel in a journey through his body that should have killed him instantly, but somehow hadn't. It had torn through the right lobe of the liver, creating a deep laceration that was still oozing blood. It had clipped the right kidney, creating a hematoma that would need watching. But it had avoided the bowel, avoided creating any contamination that would lead to peritonitis and sepsis. She packed the liver injury with surgical sponges and hemostatic agents, performing damage control surgery. This wasn't about perfect repairs, about beautiful technique. This was about stopping the bleeding, about controlling contamination, about getting the patient stable enough to survive the next 24 hours. The pretty reconstruction could come later, could come when he wasn't dying. Across the table, Ashford repaired the aorta with meticulous care, each suture precise and deliberate, placed with a focus Eva found herself impressed by, despite everything. When he wasn't performing for an audience, when his ego wasn't involved, when he was just a surgeon doing surgery, Ashford really was as good as his reputation suggested. The OR doors swung open suddenly, violently, and a young resident rushed in, his face pale, his eyes wide with distress. "Dr. Ashford, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but Trevor Dawson's parents are in the waiting room. They're demanding to speak with you immediately. They want to know why their son died. Senator Dawson has his attorney with him. They're talking about criminal negligence, about—" Ashford's hands stopped mid-suture. His whole body went rigid, every muscle tensing. The needle trembled in his grip. Eva looked up from the abdominal cavity, from the methodical work of saving a life. "Dr. Peterson, tell the Dawson family that Dr. Ashford is currently saving a man's life, and he will speak with them when this surgery is complete. If they cannot wait, tell them to file whatever complaints they wish. But this patient on this table deserves our full attention, and he will have it." Peterson nodded quickly and fled, the doors swinging shut behind him. Ashford's hands were shaking again, the tremor worse now. "I killed that boy," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I killed him because I wouldn't listen to you, because I thought a nurse couldn't possibly know more than a doctor, because I was so arrogant, so sure of myself, and now he's dead. 17 years old and dead because of my pride." "Marcus," Eva's voice cut through his spiral like a knife through silk. "Look at me." He looked up, his eyes wet above his mask, tears threatening to fall. "In Fallujah, I lost a Marine named Sergeant Wilson, Robert Wilson, 23 years old, married, had a baby girl he'd never met. I had 2 critical casualties, and I had to choose who to treat first. I had to make a choice. I hesitated for 3 seconds, trying to decide, trying to calculate who had the better chance. Wilson bled out in those 3 seconds. 3 seconds of doubt, of hesitation, and he died. I made the wrong choice, and he died in my arms, calling for his wife, asking me to tell his daughter he loved her." Eva's voice was steady, but there was an old pain in it, a scar that had never quite healed, that still ached when the weather changed. "Commander Garrett found me afterward, sitting in the wreckage, covered in Wilson's blood, convinced I should never practice medicine again, convinced I was a murderer in scrubs. You know what he told me?" Ashford shook his head, transfixed, listening. "He said that doubt kills faster than bullets. He said that hesitation is the enemy of good medicine. He said that the only way to honor the dead is to save the living, to learn from our mistakes instead of being destroyed by them. Wilson died because I hesitated, but 17 other Marines lived because I didn't hesitate again, because I learned." She paused, letting that sink in, letting him absorb the lesson. Trevor Dawson is dead, and that's a tragedy you'll carry forever. It should weigh on you. It should change you. But David Garrett is alive right now, on this table, because you're not hesitating, because you're learning. So finish the repair. Honor Trevor by saving David. Make his death mean something by letting it teach you humility. Ashford took a shuddering breath, his chest heaving, then his hands steadied. The tremor disappeared. He completed the suture line with perfect technique, each stitch placed with care and precision, and something that looked like prayer. "Clamps coming off," he announced, his voice stronger now. "Let's see if it holds." They removed the vascular clamps together, a synchronized movement. Eva and Ashford both held their breath as blood flowed through the repaired aorta, as the vessel expanded with each heartbeat. The suture line held. Perfect, watertight, beautiful in its simplicity. "It's good," the assisting nurse said, her voice filled with relief and something like awe. "Pressure is stabilizing, 85/50 and rising. Heart rhythm is regular. Urine output is improving. Kidney function looks good." Eva allowed herself a small smile behind her mask, a moment of victory in a day full of small deaths. "Good work, Dr. Ashford. Now help me with this liver. We're not done yet." They worked together for another 2 hours, repairing what could be repaired, packing what couldn't, placing drains and closing layers. Slowly, methodically, with growing confidence and mutual respect, they put David Garrett back together. The tension that had defined their relationship for 2 years dissolved in the shared purpose of saving a life, in the recognition of mutual competence, in the hard-won humility that comes from facing your own failures. When they finally closed the chest, replacing the ribs and suturing the skin with careful stitches that would leave the smallest scar possible, Eva's hands were cramping and her leg was screaming. She had been standing for 4 hours straight on a limb that wasn't designed for that kind of abuse anymore, on titanium pins and surgical scars and stubborn will. "He's stable," the anesthesiologist announced, his voice carrying relief and professional satisfaction. "Pressure is 90/60. Heart rhythm is regular and strong. Core temperature is coming up. Urine output is good. He's going to make it. He's actually going to make it." A collective exhale went through the OR, a release of tension that had been building for hours. The nurses smiled behind their masks. Even Ashford's shoulders sagged with relief, with the weight of responsibility lifting slightly. They wheeled Garrett to the ICU, and Eva followed, limping badly now, her left leg dragging, each step sending jolts of pain up her spine. Sarah tried to help her, tried to offer an arm, but Eva waved her off. She needed to see David settled, needed to confirm with her own eyes that he was truly stable, that she hadn't lost him after all this. ICU, bed 7. The machines beeped with reassuring regularity, a symphony of life. Garrett was intubated still, would be for at least another day, but his color was better. The gray was fading, replaced by pink. Death was receding, slinking back to whatever dark corner it had emerged from. Eva sank into the chair beside his bed with a groan she couldn't suppress, and only then did she realize how exhausted she was. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the rescue, through the surgery, through everything, was draining away, leaving her hollow and aching and so tired she could barely think. Garrett's eyes fluttered open, hazy with sedation but aware, conscious. He couldn't talk around the breathing tube, couldn't form words, but his eyes found Eva and held her gaze with an intensity that spoke volumes. She took his hand. It was warm, alive, the pulse strong and steady beneath her fingers. Real, solid, here. "All 7 Marines are alive, Dave," she said quietly, her voice rough with emotion she hadn't let herself feel until now. "Jake Whitmore is safe. The laptop is secure. The mercenaries are dead or scattered. You did it. The mission is complete." Garrett's eyes crinkled at the corners, the closest he could come to a smile with a tube down his throat. His hand squeezed hers weakly, a gesture that said, "Thank you," said, "I knew you'd come," said so many things that didn't need words. "And you," Eva continued, her voice thick with tears she refused to shed. "Not yet. You kept my gear for 7 years. You said I'd come back someday. You were right. You stubborn bastard, you were right." A single tear escaped from the corner of Garrett's eye, running down into his hairline, disappearing into the silver hair she'd never seen before tonight. "I never stopped flying, Dave. I just forgot I still had wings. Thank you for remembering when I couldn't." He squeezed her hand again. Then his eyes drifted closed, pulled back into the healing darkness of sleep, into dreams she hoped were better than the reality he'd just survived. Eva sat with him until the nurses gently but firmly told her she needed to let him rest, needed to let them do their work. She stood with effort, her body protesting every movement, and limped out into the hallway on legs that barely functioned, and nearly collided with an assembly that looked like a military honor guard, like something from a state funeral or a medal ceremony. 20 Marines in dress blues lined the hallway, standing at perfect attention, their uniforms immaculate, their bearing impeccable. At their head stood a man with 4 stars on his shoulders and a face carved from granite and will. General Robert Whitmore, commander of 3rd Marine Division, the man whose son Eva had saved, looked like he could eat nails for breakfast and ask for seconds. Beside him, in a wheelchair with a blanket around his shoulders, despite the warmth of the hospital, sat Jake Whitmore. The young Marine's eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, still carrying the shadow of what he'd seen, but alive, so incredibly, impossibly alive. Eva stopped, suddenly very aware that she was still wearing her blood-soaked flight suit, that her hair was a disaster, that she probably looked like she'd been through a war, which she supposed she had. General Whitmore walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps, each footfall measured and precise. His face was unreadable, a mask of military discipline. But as he got closer, Eva saw that his jaw was trembling slightly, saw moisture gathering in his eyes. Emotion, held in check by a lifetime of military discipline, threatening to break through the walls he'd built. He stopped 3 feet in front of her. Then, slowly, deliberately, moving with the precision of a man who had performed this action 10,000 times, he came to attention. His boots clicked together with a sound like a rifle shot in the quiet hallway, sharp and final. And he saluted. Behind him, 20 Marines saluted in perfect unison, the sound of their synchronized movement like distant thunder, like the sound of respect made physical. "Lieutenant Commander Evangeline Hartwell," the general said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite hide, emotion that made his words waver and crack. "My son lives because of you. 7 Marines live because of you. Our nation is safer because of you. You performed miracles today, miracles that will be taught in every combat medicine course for the next 50 years. He held the salute, and Eva, after a moment of stunned paralysis, after her brain caught up with what was happening, returned it with crisp precision. "Just doing the job, sir," she said, falling back on the old formulas, on the comfortable patterns of military speech. "No," the general said firmly, emphatically, dropping his salute with controlled precision. "You did more than the job, much more. My son tells me you performed open-heart surgery in a downed aircraft under enemy fire. He tells me you shot an RPG gunner from a suspended cable 50 feet in the air. He tells me you refused to leave anyone behind, that you could have escaped, but stayed until everyone was safe." The general's voice cracked slightly on the last words, emotion breaking through. "And this hospital," he turned to look at the gathering crowd of staff, at Marcus Ashford standing in the background looking small and defeated and ashamed. "This hospital was blind to the hero in their halls. They had a legend scrubbing their floors, and they treated her like she was invisible." He turned back to Eva, his eyes fierce with conviction. "The Navy wants you back, Commander, if you'll have us. Position, chief instructor at the Joint Special Operations Medical Training Center, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Full colonel rank, carte blanche to build the program as you see fit. Train the next generation of angels. Eva looked at Sarah, standing in the crowd with tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped in front of her like she was witnessing something sacred. She looked at the ICU, where David was sleeping peacefully for the first time in God knew how long. She looked at Jake Whitmore, who was smiling at her with the gratitude of someone who had been given a second chance at life, a second chance at everything. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Eva asked, her voice steady. "Granted, always. I accept on one condition. I train civilians alongside military. Paramedics, nurses, EMTs, firefighters, anyone who might need to save a life under impossible conditions. The next angel might be scrubbing floors right now, invisible because nobody's looking. I want to find them, all of them." The general smiled, a real smile that transformed his severe face into something almost grandfatherly, something warm. "Granted, you'll have full autonomy over curriculum, over admissions, over everything. Build your program, find your angels." Eva nodded, then looked directly at Sarah, her voice carrying across the crowded hallway. "You're my first student. Pack your bags. We leave for Fort Bragg in 2 weeks." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and joy and disbelief. "Me? But I'm just—" "You're the only one who saw me when everyone else saw a broken nurse," Eva interrupted, her voice fierce with conviction. "You're the only one who was kind when kindness cost you nothing but gave me everything. Don't waste that gift. Don't stay small when you were meant to fly." She turned back to the general, standing straight despite the pain, despite the exhaustion. "I accept your offer, sir. Thank you for the opportunity." Then she did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She walked past the general, past the honor guard of Marines, straight to where Marcus Ashford stood against the wall, his face a mask of misery and shame and something that might have been hope. He looked up as she approached, his eyes hollow. "I killed Trevor Dawson," he said, his voice barely a whisper, confessing to her like she was a priest and this was absolution. "I need to resign. I can't practice medicine anymore. Every patient I see, I'll see his face. I can't—" "You can't undo Trevor," Eva interrupted, her voice gentle but firm, not letting him spiral into self-pity. "But you can honor him. You saved David Garrett tonight. Your hands, your skill, your knowledge. Yes, I guided you. Yes, I taught you. But you did the work. You made the sutures. You repaired the vessel. That was you." She paused, choosing her words carefully, knowing they would shape what came next for this man. "Marcus, you're a brilliant surgeon, one of the best I've ever worked with. But brilliance without humility kills people. Trevor Dawson is proof of that. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to meet with his parents. You're going to tell them the truth, the whole truth. You're going to own your mistake. You're going to let them rage at you, let them hate you, and you're going to take it. All of it." Ashford nodded, tears streaming down his face now, no longer trying to hide them. "And then," Eva continued, "you're going to become the surgeon you're capable of being, the one who listens, the one who teaches without condescension, the one who understands that the janitor might know something you don't, the one who makes Trevor Dawson's death mean something by preventing other deaths." She extended her hand, offering not forgiveness, that wasn't hers to give, but something else, a path forward, a chance. Ashford looked at it for a long moment, then took it. His grip was firm, and when their eyes met, there was something different in his face. Humility, understanding, the beginning of wisdom purchased at terrible cost. "If you want to learn how to be that surgeon," Eva added, her voice soft, "I'll have a spot in my civilian training program. We'll teach you what they don't teach in medical school. Humility, listening, how to save lives when ego wants to kill them. if you can keep up with a limping instructor." Ashford actually smiled, a small, sad smile, but genuine, real. "I'd like that, thank you. I don't deserve it, but I'd like it." Eva nodded and turned away, exhaustion finally overwhelming her. Her leg gave out without warning, the abuse of the past 8 hours finally too much, the adrenaline finally gone. She stumbled, and would have fallen if Captain Thorne hadn't caught her, his massive hands gentle as they steadied her. "I got you, Angel," he said softly, echoing the words David Garrett had said to her 8 years ago, in a desert on the other side of the world. "I'm okay," Eva protested weakly, trying to stand on her own, trying to maintain some dignity. "No, ma'am, you're not. You're running on fumes and will and nothing else. Let us help. That's an order." Sarah appeared on her other side, and together they helped Eva to an exam room, supporting her weight, taking the burden she'd carried alone for so long. She sat on the bed, and the moment she was off her feet, the pain in her leg became a living thing, became fire and ice and agony all at once. "When did you last take pain medication?" Sarah asked, already pulling up Eva's flight suit leg to examine the scarred limb, to assess the damage. "This morning, maybe yesterday, I don't remember. Time stopped meaning anything somewhere over the Cascades." Sarah shook her head, her expression a mix of exasperation and affection. She cleaned and bandaged several cuts Eva hadn't even noticed, administered pain medication with gentle efficiency, elevated the injured leg on pillows. "You need rest," Sarah said firmly, her voice brooking no argument. "Real rest, 12 hours minimum. Sleep." "Can't," Eva murmured, already feeling the medication pulling her down into darkness. "Need to check on the Marines. Need to debrief. Need to—" "The Marines are fine," Thorne said from the doorway, his massive frame filling the space. "They're being treated and debriefed. You did your job, ma'am. Better than anyone could have hoped. Now let us do ours. Rest. That's not a request." Eva wanted to argue, wanted to maintain control, wanted to stay vigilant, but the exhaustion was like a physical weight pressing down on her, making thought difficult, making consciousness a burden. Her eyes closed despite her best efforts to keep them open. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was Sarah's voice, soft and proud. "Sleep well, Angel. You've earned it. You've earned everything." When Eva woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, warm and golden. She sat up with a groan, disoriented, her body aching in places she'd forgotten could ache. The wall clock said 8 in the morning. She'd slept for almost 7 hours, her body shutting down and refusing to wake until it had gotten what it needed. Someone had draped a blanket over her. Her boots were off, lined up neatly beside the bed. Her injured leg was properly bandaged and elevated on pillows, and sitting in a chair beside the bed, arms folded across his chest, apparently having stood guard all night like a sentinel, was Captain Silas Thorne. He opened his eyes as she stirred, alert immediately, fully awake in an instant. "Morning, ma'am. How's the leg?" "Hurts like hell," Eva admitted, testing it gingerly. "But I've had worse, much worse." "General Whitmore is in the waiting room," Thorne said, standing and stretching, his joints popping. "The hospital board is with him. So are several reporters who somehow found out about last night. And apparently the Secretary of Defense wants to call you personally." Eva groaned, running her hands through her hair, feeling the dried blood and dirt and God knew what else. "Great. I look like I've been through a war, and I'm about to meet the press." "You have been through a war," Thorne pointed out reasonably, "and you won. The press can deal with reality." He helped her stand, and Eva tested her leg. It held, barely, protesting with every step but functional. She limped to the door, Thorne hovering protectively beside her like a bodyguard, like a friend. The hospital lobby had been transformed into something resembling a press conference or a state ceremony. Cameras, reporters with microphones, hospital administrators in expensive suits looking simultaneously thrilled and terrified by the attention, by the spotlight suddenly shining on their institution. And in the center of it all, General Whitmore stood with his son Jake beside him, both of them in fresh uniforms, both of them looking rested and alive. When Eva emerged, leaning heavily on Thorne, her flight suit wrinkled and stained, her hair a disaster, the room went silent. Every head turned, every camera focused. The general walked toward her, and this time there was no military formality, no protocol, no distance. He simply pulled her into a hug, this four-star general embracing a limping nurse in wrinkled scrubs like she was family, like she was precious. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking, his iron control finally cracking. "Thank you for bringing my boy home. Thank you for reminding us what heroism looks like." When he released her, Jake stepped forward. He looked better now, cleaned up, the terror gone from his eyes, replaced with something else. Determination, purpose, the look of someone who had found his calling. "Colonel Hartwell," he said, using her new rank with pride and respect. "My father told me stories about Angel 6 my whole life. I thought they were exaggerations, legends, war stories told to inspire kids. I didn't understand that legends are just regular people doing impossible things when it matters most." He stood at attention and saluted her, the movement crisp and perfect. "I want to be a flight surgeon, ma'am. Because of you. I want to learn how to save lives the way you do. I want to be worthy of the second chance you gave me." Eva returned the salute, her movements automatic, muscle memory from a lifetime ago. "Then you'll be in my first class, Jake. Report to Fort Bragg in 3 weeks. I hope you're ready to work harder than you've ever worked in your life." "I am, ma'am. I swear it." The hospital director stepped forward, a nervous smile plastered on his face, his hands wringing together. "Commander Hartwell, on behalf of Seattle Memorial Hospital, I want to apologize for any difficulties you experienced during your employment here. We had no idea of your background, your credentials. We would be honored if you would consider returning in a consulting capacity, perhaps establishing a trauma training program, perhaps—" "No." The word was flat, final, allowing no discussion or negotiation. Eva looked at the director, at the board members, at all the people who had ignored her for 2 years, who had let Ashford treat her like she was invisible, like she was less than human. "I'm done with this hospital, but I'll give you a piece of advice, free of charge. The people you ignore, the ones you think are beneath you because they're not doctors or administrators or people with impressive titles, they might be the ones who save your life someday. They might be heroes in disguise. Treat them accordingly. See them. Value them." She turned to Sarah, who was standing at the edge of the crowd, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped together. "Sarah, you ready to leave this place behind? Ready to learn to fly?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak, emotion choking off her words. "Good. We leave for Fort Bragg in 2 weeks. Pack light. We'll provide everything you need." Eva looked around the lobby one last time, at the place that had been her prison for 2 years, at the gilded cage she'd built for herself out of fear and pain and the belief that she was broken. Then she limped toward the exit, flanked by Marines, escorted like the hero she had always been, but had forgotten she could be. Marcus Ashford stood near the door, his face still carrying the weight of what he'd done, what he'd lost. As Eva passed, he stepped forward, his voice hesitant. "Commander Hartwell, may I speak with you, just for a moment?" Eva nodded, and they stepped into an empty hallway, away from the cameras and crowds. Ashford looked like he hadn't slept, like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "I met with the Dawson family last night, told them everything. The truth, that I ignored your diagnosis because of my pride, that Trevor died because I was too arrogant to listen to a nurse." He swallowed hard, his throat working. "Senator Dawson punched me, broke my nose. I didn't stop him, didn't defend myself. And you know what? It felt right. It felt like justice. Marcus, no, let me finish. There will be an investigation, probably a lawsuit. I'll likely lose my position here, maybe my license, and I deserve all of it. He took a breath. But I needed to thank you for giving me a chance to own my mistakes instead of hiding from them, for showing me what real courage looks like. It's not about being unafraid. It's about doing the right thing even when it terrifies you. He extended his hand, and this time there was no hesitation. I meant what I said. If your offer still stands, I want to train with you. I want to learn how to be the doctor I should have been, the doctor Trevor Dawson deserved. Eva shook his hand, her grip firm. Fort Bragg, first Monday of next month. Don't be late. And Marcus, bring your humility. Leave your ego at home. You won't need it where we're going. Ashford nodded, something like hope flickering in his eyes. Thank you. I won't let you down. Don't thank me. Thank Trevor Dawson by becoming better. That's the only thanks that matters. Eva walked out of Seattle Memorial Hospital for the last time. The morning air was cool and clean, washing away the smell of antiseptic and old regrets, carrying the promise of new beginnings. Captain Thorne had arranged for a car to take her home, to let her rest and recover, but Eva waved it off. I'll walk. I need to clear my head. Need to think. Ma'am, it's 3 miles. Your leg. Eva took one step and her leg nearly buckled. The pain was immediate and intense, a reminder of limitations, of reality. Thorne caught her before she fell. Okay, Eva admitted with a rueful smile. Maybe the car is a good idea. She climbed into the back seat, and before they'd driven 2 blocks, before they'd even left the hospital parking lot, exhaustion claimed her again. She fell asleep against the window, her breath fogging the glass, her body finally allowing itself to rest. She dreamed of helicopters and falling snow and David Garrett's smile. She dreamed of Trevor Dawson, alive and whole, playing baseball in a park somewhere. She dreamed of wings, strong and unbroken, carrying her toward a sunrise she thought she'd never see. When she woke, she was home, and waiting on her doorstep was a package. Inside, her new uniform, Colonel's eagles gleaming in the afternoon light, and a handwritten note from David Garrett, his messy scrawl barely legible. You flew again, Angel. Welcome back. We've been waiting for you. Fort Bragg has a squadron of students who need to learn from the best. Show them their wings. Dave. Eva smiled, really smiled, for the first time in 7 years. She was going home. Not to this apartment, not to Seattle. Home to the sky, to the rotors, to the mission she'd been born for. Angel 6 was back, and this time, she wasn't flying alone. 6 months later. The training facility at Fort Bragg hummed with purposeful energy, with the sound of lives being transformed. Eva stood before her first class of 40 students, 20 military personnel and 20 civilians, all of them carrying their own scars, their own stories, their own reasons for being here. Sarah Mitchell sat in the front row, confident now, her skills honed by months of intensive training, no longer the uncertain junior nurse, but a competent combat medic in the making. Marcus Ashford sat beside her, humbled but focused, learning to be the surgeon he should have been all along, learning that healing requires more than skill, it requires humanity. Jake Whitmore was there, eager and determined, on his way to becoming a flight surgeon, carrying the memory of that night in the mountains like a sacred trust. And in the back row, a young woman with a pronounced limp, a veteran who had been told she would never work in medicine again, but had refused to accept that verdict, who had found Eva's program and applied with a letter that simply said, I'm broken, but I want to fly. Eva looked at them, at the future of combat medicine, at the next generation of angels waiting to discover their wings. Lesson 1, she said, her voice carrying authority that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with experience, with having walked through fire and survived. In the field, your rank doesn't matter. Your speed doesn't matter. Your limitations don't matter. What matters is your knowledge, your courage, and your refusal to give up. Ever. She tapped her chest, right over her heart, over the tattoo that still read, Noli Timere. This is what saves lives. Not your hands, though they matter. Not your training, though that matters too. This, your heart, your will, your decision that the person in front of you deserves every ounce of skill and courage you possess. A hand went up. One of the civilians, a young paramedic with eager eyes. Colonel Hartwell, is it true you performed a thoracotomy in a combat zone while under fire? Eva smiled, the question taking her back to that night in the snow, to Garrett's open chest and her hands inside saving his life. It's true, and it's true that I almost failed. I've lost patience. I've made mistakes. That's why you're here, to learn not just from my successes, but from my failures. So when you face your moment, and you will face it, you'll know what to do. You'll know how to choose action over doubt. She paused, looking around the room, seeing herself in each of their faces. Your scars don't define you. Your mistakes don't end you. What defines you is what you do after you fall. Do you stay down, or do you get back up and fly? Do you let fear win, or do you choose courage? The students were silent, absorbed, understanding that they were learning from someone who had walked the path they were just beginning, someone who had been broken and rebuilt herself into something stronger. That night, after the class had been dismissed, after the building had grown quiet, Eva stood alone on the training field under a sky full of stars. The same stars that had watched over her in Fallujah, in Seattle, in the Devil's Throat. The same stars that would watch over her students as they went out into the world to save lives. She heard footsteps and turned to find David Garrett walking toward her, moving slowly but steadily, fully recovered now, back to full duty, the scars hidden beneath his uniform. "Beautiful night," he said, coming to stand beside her, his shoulder touching hers in comfortable camaraderie. "It is," Eva agreed. They stood in comfortable silence, two warriors who had saved each other's lives, who had been broken and rebuilt and broken again, who understood that some wounds never fully heal, but that survival is its own kind of victory. "Do you ever regret it?" Garrett asked quietly. "Coming back? You had a quiet life in Seattle, safe, no one shooting at you, no life or death decisions." Eva thought about the question, about the 2 years she had spent being invisible, being dismissed, being small, about the night 4 helicopters had landed and reminded her who she really was. "I was hiding, Dave, not living. You kept my gear for 7 years because you knew I'd need it again. You knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. You knew the call would come. And now? Now I'm training the next generation of angels, saving lives by teaching others to save lives." She looked at him, her oldest friend, the man who had refused to let her disappear. "Now I'm flying again, and it feels like coming home." Garrett nodded, understanding. "The legend of Angel 6 is going to grow, you know. These students will tell their students. The story of the limping instructor who refused to quit, who showed them that scars are proof of survival, not evidence of weakness." "Good," Eva said. "Let them tell stories. As long as those stories save lives, I don't care how exaggerated they get." In the distance, a helicopter lifted off from the training pad, its rotors beating the air in that distinctive rhythm Eva would know until the day she died. The sound of salvation, the sound of hope, the sound of angels flying to the rescue. Eva closed her eyes and listened, feeling the vibration in her bones, in her scars, in the titanium pins that held her together. "Noli timere," she thought, "fear not." And in that moment, standing on a training field in North Carolina, with the stars above and the sound of rotors in the distance, Colonel Evangeline Hartwell understood something profound, something that would shape the rest of her life. She had spent 7 years thinking she was broken, 7 years believing that her best days were behind her. 7 years hiding from the person she had been, convinced that the fall from the helicopter had destroyed her. But she had never been broken. She had just been waiting for the moment when she would be needed again, waiting for the call that would remind her who she really was, waiting for the courage to step into the void and trust that something would catch her. Eva opened her eyes and looked at the night sky. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Colonel Hartwell, I'm a nurse in Portland. I read about you. I have a limp too, from a car accident. They told me I'd never work trauma again. Can someone like me really save lives? Can I apply to your program?" Eva's fingers moved quickly across the screen. "You're not broken. You're an angel who forgot her wings. Send your application tonight. We start next month. And bring your scars. We'll teach you to fly with them." She hit send and looked back at the stars, at the infinite possibilities spread across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Her phone buzzed again, and again, and again. Applications, from nurses and paramedics and EMTs all across the country, from people who had been told they were too slow, too old, too broken, from people who limped and struggled and refused to give up, from angels who just needed someone to remind them they could fly. Eva smiled and opened her laptop. She had work to do. 40 students to train, 100 more waiting for acceptance letters, 1,000 lives that would be saved by the people she would teach. And somewhere in a hospital in Portland, a nurse with a limp was packing her bags, preparing to discover she'd never been broken at all. Just waiting for someone to show her the way home. The lights in Eva's office burned late into the night as she worked, preparing the next day's lessons, reviewing applications, building the program that would change combat medicine forever. On her wall hung a photo of 17 Marines beside her Navy Cross. Below it, David Garrett's note, "Angels don't retire, they just wait for the next mission." Eva looked at the training schedule, at the names of students who would arrive next month, at the lives that would be changed and saved. And she understood her mission now, not just to teach, but to find, to seek out the hidden angels, the dismissed nurses, the limping paramedics, the forgotten heroes working in shadows, to remind them they were made to fly, one student at a time, one life at a time, until the sky was full of angels. Because Eva had learned the truth that changes everything. We are never truly broken. We're just between missions. And when the call comes, when the helicopters descend and the world demands the impossible, we discover something profound. The wings were always there. We had just forgotten how to use them. Eva saved her work and turned off the light. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, new opportunities to change the world, one saved life at a time. She limped to the window and looked out at the dark training field where, somewhere in the future, hundreds of students would learn to save thousands of lives. "Noli timere," she whispered to the night. "Fear not." The angel was home, and she was building an army.